the laziest Kryptonian in the Marvel Universe. Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction, so please don't attempt real magic. The results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 176: Wakanda's representative to the United Nations. Back in New York, Audrey Hepburn asked Henry to contact UNICEF to renew their visits and aid work around the world. As a versatile assistant, Henry, dressed in a sharp suit and carrying a briefcase, followed behind Hepburn. Led by UNICEF personnel, they were on their way to a meeting with representatives from Wakanda. Soon, they arrived at a small conference room. Upon seeing the woman enter, the Wakanda representatives politely stood to greet her. The UN staff introduced the two parties at the same time. Representative Jabari: this is Ms. Audrey Hepburn. Madam, this is Wakanda's representative to the United Nations, Mr. Jabari. The two shook hands politely and greeted each other, saying, "Madam, it's a great honor to meet you. On behalf of my country's King T'Chaka, I would like to send you my greetings, Representative Jabari. It's a pleasure to meet you. Please give my respects to your king on my behalf. Please take a seat, please." After everyone was seated, Ms. Hepburn asked straight to the point, "Representative Jabari, I would like to ask about my previous application to visit your country. I wonder if your country has responded." "I'm sorry, Mom. The king means that it is inconvenient to accept your visit. Our country's facilities are simple and cannot accommodate UN officials and distinguished guests like you. Isn't it because of this that we need to go and see if there is anything your country needs help with?" Audrey Hepburn did not give up easily and continued to persuade. The Wakanda representative remained calm and composed, smiling as she replied, "Madam, I hope you're not equating poverty with need for help. I don't deny that, by Western standards, Wakanda is a poor, backward, agricultural nation. With a per capita GDP of less than 100 yuan, it's impossible for everyone to own a Chanel or Louis Vuitton bag. But that doesn't necessarily mean we need international aid. Africa, as a mother continent, nourishes all who live within it. Those countries suffering from famine aren't actually suffering from a lack of food, they're suffering from the ravages of war. I'm proud to say that Wakanda has done a great job protecting its people, keeping them safe from the scourge of war. Wakanda's children not only have enough to eat, but also have access to healthcare. While we may not be able to afford Johnson & Johnson or Novartis drugs, we have our own medical technology. As for education, we send qualified students to the United States and the UK every year, so I believe that Wakanda's so-called poverty is only what the Western world sees as poverty. But we consider ourselves well off and don't need aid from other countries, even the United Nations. Madam, please use your limited resources for those who need it most. Whether in Asia or America, there are children suffering from hunger. They deserve your concern, Madam." Audrey Hepburn folded her arms and said, "I'm sorry. If my words offended you, please accept my apology. Perhaps, as you said, I should focus on those who need help more. It's just a pity I can't see the conditions in Wakanda with my own eyes, and I can't personally pay my respects to your king. I hope we'll have the opportunity to visit your country in the future." "I hope so," said the Jabari representative, smiling, his teeth white, a stark contrast to his skin tone. After a few more pleasantries, the two stood up and said goodbye. It was a rare opportunity for Ms. Hepburn to visit the United Nations, but she had a busy schedule. On the way to the next stop, she asked Henry, who was following behind her, "Son, do you think what the ambassador said is true? It's not like the Northern Dynasty, who, despite being in chaos, still seeks praise from the public. Despite the United Nations and Audrey Hepburn's golden reputation, this world has its challenges. However, even UNICEF recommended against visiting the land belonging to the Northern Dynasty." The lady didn't seem to insist on going. After a moment's reflection on today's question, Henry said, "Perhaps they truly don't need the aid. They're not, like the Northern Dynasty, just trying to puff themselves up." "Why do you think so?" Henry said, "It's their attitude. They're not like those from authoritarian countries who insist on maintaining a superior demeanor in every word and action, fearing being looked down upon. They're not afraid to use language that mocks their own country, even in informal and private settings. But the fact that they dared to speak like that suggests either they were entitled to do so or they were telling the truth. Either way, it means they come from a place where casual remarks don't cause trouble. So, while his words were a bit out of line and didn't seem like those of a proper diplomatic envoy, considering he was speaking behind closed doors with you, boss, it's not surprising. Even what? Audrey Hepburn asked. Even from their words, one could sense a condescending disdain, a criticism of what he described as Western values. I'm a little confused as to where this attitude comes from. Audrey Hepburn pondered the situation. The previous conversation had indeed resonated with her. This was unlike the often undeveloped countries where officials from some countries tended to appear outwardly powerful but inwardly weak. Wakanda's UN representative truly possessed an inexplicable confidence that made one believe his words. So, we're really not going? Ms. Hepburn asked. If you want my advice, it's to stay away. Since they don't feel they need help, forcing ourselves to join them would only end up hurting both sides. The UN staff would be troublesome, and the people in Wakanda wouldn't be happy, Henry said honestly. Do you think there are other suitable locations? I remember the report you compiled for me earlier. It seems we haven't visited Central and South America in a while, Henry said with reservation. Boss, let's discuss this after we meet with UNICEF. Let's see if the working group has compiled any information and come up with any other suggestions. Well, that's fine. Just after she finished speaking, Ms. Hepburn suddenly stopped. She bent slightly and stood against the wall. Henry hurried forward and asked, Boss, are you okay? It's okay. I just had a sudden abdominal cramp, and it's gone now. Ms. Hepburn stood up straight and was about to continue walking. Henry, who didn't know whether he should lend a hand to support her, said helplessly, In fact, I feel that your rest during this period is not enough. It seems that some of the illnesses accumulated in the past have all come out during this gap. How about we take a break for a while? Although we have the title of Goodwill Ambassador, the people at UNICEF are happy to relax as long as we don't make any requests. Unlike you, you now regard this job as your main job and run around every day. Why are you so talkative? The lady complained with a pout. Chapter 177 Destiny of Somalia. UNICEF's visits have finally resumed. Led by Audrey Hepburn, the Goodwill Ambassador, they visited countries in Central and South America. Then, in September, they returned to Somalia, their fateful destination. This East African country was completely different from the one they had fled over a year earlier. Back then, Somalia looked impoverished, but that was just poverty. There weren't many armed men on the streets. But now, even in the capital, there are checkpoints at every few intersections. Even across the street, there are checkpoints belonging to different armed groups. Last time, they could charge in with a squad of UN peacekeepers. This time, however, the UNICEF team, with a platoon, had to proceed with caution. Ms. Hepburn wanted to visit the Child Protection Agency in the south she had visited the last time, the one she had fled after being kidnapped. But according to local officials, it had been abandoned. No one knew when it happened. Anyway, after a while of local militants causing trouble, the peacekeeping troops arrived for exercises to join in the fun. And then, nothing happened. Although the woman felt pity, she didn't grieve for long. He had seen and experienced countless similar things in his life, and while each one brought a sense of loss and sadness, he had to admit that he had gradually grown accustomed to the feeling. To prevent herself from becoming numb, the woman chose to offer her care and support in her own way, as if burning herself out. This was Henry's feeling from the perspective of an outsider. It was especially incredible how such a small body could squeeze out such immense energy. Even the men accompanying the team complained bitterly about the intensity of the itinerary, but Audrey Hepburn never complained once. Whenever he was in front of the children, he would interact intimately with these immature and undernourished children. Sometimes he would hold them and softly sing nursery rhymes. Perhaps no one could understand the lyrics, but music knows no boundaries. Even those ignorant children found peace in the beautiful melodies. He always had a kind smile that gave courage to those who saw it. Just like Audrey Hepburn on the big screen, even a single smile seemed to heal the wounds deep within someone's soul. But as he said goodbye to his children and returned to the car to depart, everything happened so suddenly. Audrey Hepburn collapsed. Henry was the first to notice something was wrong, as her heartbeat and other vital signs were clearly abnormal. Even though to everyone else, he seemed to be sitting in the back seat, resting his eyes normally. "Doctor, doctor," Henry shouted. The accompanying doctor immediately arrived. Henry looked at the woman, her face grimacing and sweat dripping from her forehead, and said, "The boss doesn't seem right." After a quick examination, the doctor had Ms. Hepburn lie down in the back seat. He rolled up a blanket and placed it under her knees, keeping them bent. "Are you noticing any vomiting? No. Cancel the rest of the trip. Return to the hotel as soon as possible. We'll do a more thorough examination," the doctor instructed. As the most important member of the team, Ms. Hepburn collapsed, so there was no need to continue the subsequent itinerary. So after talking to the people from UNICEF, everyone rushed to the hotel they had booked to stay today and found a way to get Ms. Hepburn to check in early. Just as Henry was holding the woman and preparing to go back to the room, Audrey Hepburn, who had temporarily woken up, said weakly, "Kid, just give me one painkiller. It's okay." Henry showed an ugly smile and said, "Boss, one is not enough. I'll get a whole bottle later, you can drink it in one go. Your face is so painful that you have lost all color. Silly child, can you take medicine like this? Great, this proves that at least you are still awake and your mind is still normal. So let's ask a doctor to take a look, instead of making a diagnosis ourselves." After putting the person on the clean bed, Henry was about to let the doctor take over, but he didn't expect to be stopped by Ms. Hepburn. He said with difficulty, "Children in Africa, the itinerary for the visit." Henry understood and immediately said, "I'll discuss the next steps with UNICEF and draw up some plans. Boss, you rest first and let the doctor take a look. I'll report back when you're better." Ms. Hepburn nodded and let him go. The team's doctor and accompanying nurse immediately took over, closed the door, and began to examine the woman, who had regained consciousness. At this time, a member of the UN entourage came forward and asked, "Henry, how is Ms. Hepburn? The doctor is examining her inside, and I can't speak before the doctor," Henry said, forcing a smile. "So, what should we do about the next itinerary?" someone asked worriedly. Clapping his hands, Henry grabbed everyone's attention and said, "Everyone, please listen to me. We'll consider the itinerary after tomorrow's visit after the doctor's diagnosis. However, we can't continue or postpone any further trips today, since today's destinations are all nearby. We'll split up into several teams to deliver the scheduled aid directly to them and collect receipts. Remember to tell them that the field visit is cancelled because the woman is ill. However, we'll still deliver the necessary supplies. This is essentially implementing Plan C of the backup plan. Is that okay with everyone?" Since this was within the established plan and the conditions met, and it wasn't the result of anyone's own arbitrary decision, everyone naturally had no problem. Everyone divided into teams according to the tasks outlined in the backup plan, escorting the supplies to the destinations they were supposed to visit today. At the same time, someone called UN headquarters in New York to report the situation of the visiting teams. Others contacted the United Nations regarding the subsequent scheduled distribution of supplies. Given the sheer volume of supplies, and the fact that each visit doesn't involve just one or two locations, it's impossible to carry everything with a team and distribute it like a scatterbrain. Instead, several centralized collection points, akin to collection stations, will be established at the scheduled locations. At each stage of the itinerary, all supplies will be collected at one of these collection points and then distributed throughout the journey. This significantly reduces the team's transportation burden and allows for greater flexibility in the allocation of supplies. However, if the main character falls, subsequent arrangements will depend on the condition of the Goodwill Ambassador. Until then, everyone in the team must maintain control of all factors to be able to make any improvisations. Chapter 178 Interrupted Visit. It was almost dinner time when Audrey Hepburn slowly awoke from her sleep. A fragrant aroma filled her mouth. This was the result of Henry's own cooking, using his own stove and ingredients. It was a bowl of egg drop porridge. The water was bottled from Europe, the rice was Thai fragrant rice, and the eggs were local, though the origin of the chickens was unknown. As soon as he saw Audrey Hepburn awake, Henry brought out a small stand that could be placed over the bed, scooped out a small bowl of porridge, and brought it over. He said, "Boss, is there a way to help yourself? Or do you need me to serve you? It's that time again." "Yes, I figured you haven't been accustomed to African cuisine lately. It's either too fishy or unhygienic. So you often skip meals and cook your own meals back at the hotel. So I just made it right away to save the hassle and miss dinner. Haha, I'll do it myself." "I'm not a patient," Audrey Hepburn said bravely, sitting up with a few pillows propped up behind her with Henry's help. Henry shook his head and said, "No, the doctor said you are." Looking at the small bowl and spoon in front of her, Ms. Hepburn didn't touch it directly. Instead, she calmly asked, "What did the doctor say?" "The doctor said we need to go to a hospital with more advanced equipment for examination. He can't do a more detailed examination here. He also said that your abdominal pain doesn't seem temporary and the lesion may be deeper. Just suppressing it with painkillers won't make it go away on its own, but I feel great now. Tomorrow's schedule seems fine." "Really? Then, get up and dance one leg," Henry asked, tilting his head. Audrey Hepburn looked embarrassed and said sheepishly, "Child, you're embarrassing me. I've asked the UN to arrange a plane. We're going directly back to Switzerland and going to a large hospital for examination. And I've also informed Robert that we're going back to Switzerland." The reason for returning to Switzerland was that Ms. Hepburn regularly had various examinations at the same hospital and had the most complete medical records. "Then what about the child we were scheduled to see?" the woman asked, unwilling to give up. Picking up the documents from the briefcase beside him, Henry said, "For those unfinished missions today, we've already sent people to deliver the supplies scheduled for distribution, according to Plan C in the visit plan. We've also explained to them that your general health condition precludes you from going. All trips after tomorrow will also be carried out according to Plan C. All aid will be distributed to the designated destinations. UN personnel will oversee this, and conduct field inspections. Upon returning to New York, we'll be able to compile a report on this visit. The only difference from the original plan is your absence." "Oh, that's so heartbreaking to hear. I feel like I'm dispensable," Ms. Hepburn said self-deprecatingly. Henry said, "How could that be, boss? If you weren't here, the aid would probably be sold by the local government upon arrival at the port, exchanged for other items that wouldn't be useful to the children, like weapons and ammunition. It's because of your oversight, carefully inquiring about the children's treatment wherever you go, that the supplies sent by the UN are truly delivered to the children, rather than being misappropriated. You're more useful than you think, but we still have to leave," Ms. Hepburn said disappointedly. "Only with good health can we do our work better. Otherwise, if you continue to work like this, you'll only cause trouble to others and won't help many people." Audrey Hepburn pretended to be depressed and said, "Child, don't you think I need comfort more right now, rather than such heart-wrenching words?" "Then, boss, you're fine, you're in great shape. Then you can follow my lead and insist on going on the next trip." "Stop it, you really don't leave any time for me." Audrey Hepburn picked up the spoon and slowly ate the porridge. Henry waved his hands and said, "It can't be helped. I almost suspect that your health is ruined because I've done too much for you. So you've arranged more trips, visited more places, and made yourself even more tired. If I don't help and you do it all by yourself, wouldn't the workload be less intense, less tiring, and less tiring? So I'm going to give up now. Don't count on me for everything." Looking at the older boy sitting beside the bed, looking sad and self-blaming, Audrey Hepburn wanted to rub his head. Unfortunately, the boy seemed to see through her intentions and sat far away, not giving her any chance. So Audrey Hepburn could only say, "Good boy, you don't really want me to shoulder so much work alone. I'm a patient." "Oh, now you admit you're a patient again. Since you know you're a patient, then just eat something. An empty stomach hurts your stomach. When we get back to Switzerland tomorrow and see the doctor, you'll have a lot of work to do." "Protest? I'm your employer, your boss." "Right, yes, so I'm trying to save your life so I can collect a few more years of salary." Henry pouted and muttered, "Dead men don't get paid." Realizing she couldn't argue with the boy, Audrey Hepburn simply stopped talking. But she still had to eat a bowl of porridge, because the irregular diet she had been eating recently was definitely one of the factors affecting her health. If she wanted to recover quickly, a regular diet and a regular sleep and rest schedule were essential. After finishing a small bowl of porridge, she felt a lot of strength restored. Audrey Hepburn said, "Child, give me a little more. That wasn't enough just now." "Okay, this time." Henry served less of the liquid portion, more of the soft rice porridge and egg drop soup. Ms. Hepburn finished her meal, too, without adding more. After Henry finished, he asked, "Want to see anyone else? Or just rest? Please ask the person in charge to come over. I need to confirm something with him." "Okay, wait a moment." Henry left with the pots and utensils, then returned with the person in charge of the UN team. He was an African American, also very young, under 40. A dreamer eager to do more for his country. As he entered, he greeted, "Ms. Hepburn, how are you? I'm sorry, but it seems I have to leave for a while." When addressing strangers, Audrey Hepburn didn't adopt the coquettish tone she had with Henry, but instead explained their situation clearly. "I've heard what Henry and the doctor have said. Your health is paramount, so please take care." "Thank you," Ms. Hepburn said with a smile. "So, are you all prepared for the next steps?" "Yes," Old Black explained, describing the subsequent changes. While he was the team leader, the man before him was a leading figurehead, a UNICEF Goodwill ambassador. When he had to make a decision, it was ideal for both sides to speak with one voice. So when the woman asked, he naturally answered with all his heart. Especially with the distribution of supplies. If no one was monitoring them, who knew where they would end up, and who would end up in their pockets? This was the biggest challenge of the aid operation. And the night, belonging to Africa, and to this half of the world, quietly obscured the sky outside the window. Chapter 179 Seeking Medical Treatment. I walked into a nightmare. I'd seen famine in Ethiopia and Bangladesh, but not like this. It was far worse than I had imagined, and I was unprepared for it. As we enter the 21st century, there's much to reflect on. We look around and see that the promises of the past remain unfulfilled. People still live in abject poverty, people still go hungry, people still struggle to survive. Among these people, we see children, always children. Their swollen bellies, their sad eyes, their faces that should be innocent betray pain. In their short lives, they have endured every hardship. This was part of a speech Audrey Hepburn delivered at a UNICEF event in New York City, following inconclusive preliminary medical tests in Switzerland. She delivered a speech at a UNICEF event focused on war-torn Somalia. After concluding her speech, Hepburn was helped off the podium by Robert Tuploas. Henry, a junior assistant, followed behind, led by UNICEF personnel to another small conference room. The person in charge of Audrey Hepburn's contact said respectfully, "Madam, we have received your request to suspend your activities due to illness. We sincerely hope for your speedy recovery. Thank you. Please also convey my gratitude to everyone at UNICEF for their cooperation and hard work during this period. I hope we will have the opportunity to work together again when I recover." "Yes, Mom. I'll pass it on. I'm sure everyone will look forward to your return." Being selected as a UN Goodwill Ambassador is more than just a fancy title. Whenever there are related promotional events, these Goodwill Ambassadors, who are little more than advertising billboards, must attend and endorse them. This is the price of the glittering title. Not to mention Audrey Hepburn's almost constant travel schedule, which required several teams to plan and operate. When she took sick leave, she naturally informed these people, letting them know that her work could be slowed down or she could join other projects. Of course, it's okay to just be a figurehead and receive a salary, but such people are ultimately a minority at the UN. They are simply a figurehead, never physically present. As for the other people who were doing practical work, they were being scrambled for buyout parties, and it was almost impossible for them to have some free time. This was because this was the United Nations, a place that could control everything, but also nothing. After leaving the UN building, Henry drove Ms. Hepburn and Robert to New York Public Hospital. Public hospitals like this provide low-cost medical services for low-income households or undocumented immigrants, so it is conceivable that the level of the hospital would not be very good. It is not to say that such hospitals do not have excellent doctors and advanced equipment. However, the huge demand for medical care will inevitably lead to a decline in the quality of medical care. Although Ms. Hepburn also received VIP treatment here, the expressions of the two people who came out of the clinic were indescribable. Audrey Hepburn was as calm as usual, as if nothing had changed. Robert Wards, slightly indignant, said, "These public hospitals are full of quacks. They can't even diagnose what's wrong with Audrey. They just give us a bunch of suspected, possible, and probable answers, and then ask us to run a bunch of tests." Helping the woman to a seat in the lounge area, Henry casually replied, "If it were that simple, a Swiss hospital would have figured it out. We wouldn't have to travel all the way to America." Robert asked, "What about those medical centers or private hospitals? Have you managed to get an appointment?" Henry replied, "I've called every top-ranked medical center in the United States, or one with renowned thoracic and abdominal surgeons. The fastest I can get an appointment is at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, but that's not until November. Without deep pockets or a special case, getting an appointment at these private hospitals or high-end medical centers is impossible." Even with Audrey Hepburn's fame, she still had to wait over a month, nearly 2 months, to get an appointment. It's easy to see that the world's wealthy, life-conscious individuals are flocking to America, making it impossible for top-tier medical resources to be tight. Ms. Hepburn wasn't the type to easily cut in line, so she had no choice but to register and wait in line. Compared to Robert's indignation, she was much calmer. He said in a rather nonchalant tone, "So, should we go back to Switzerland? I feel like traveling back and forth like this is a waste of time." There was a hint of understanding in his tone. "Do you think I can leave something behind for the world?" Audrey Hepburn asked. Robert squeezed her hand tightly and said, "Audrey, you've already left countless cultural treasures to the world. Why bother overthinking it? And what about you, Henry? Do you think there's anything else I can do?" Considering her health, it was impossible for her to star in another movie. Furthermore, his condition was fluctuating, and flying around the world like before would be even more risky. Henry, who was called upon, thought for a moment and said, "How about reading stories to the children? That's a good idea." "Should we find an orphanage or school?" Henry, whose thoughts and ideas became clearer and clearer, said, "No, how about finding a publishing house and a recording studio? We can record the voice of you, the boss, reciting stories so that more people can hear it. If we find an orphanage or school, not all the children there will like to listen to stories. And it will trouble the teachers and the children. As for the happy expressions of the children after listening to the stories, you can only imagine them. After all, we are not face-to-face, audiobooks." "I didn't think of that." The lady's eyes lit up, as if she had found something interesting again. "Ha, kid, you always come up with good ideas. Instead of looking for an orphanage or school willing to cooperate and running around just to read stories to the children, finding a fixed recording studio to record the recitation can avoid the trouble of running around. This is the easiest job Henry can think of for the lady." Audrey Hepburn, who does it as soon as she thinks of it, took out the address book from her handbag. She looked to see if there was anyone related to publishing on her list who could be asked about audiobooks. Although Robert was a little dissatisfied with Henry, his little assistant, for helping Audrey find work. But considering the nature of the work, this job can actually allow Audrey to stay in one place and not fly around the world again. It's hard to say that this is not a good thing. Returning home to Switzerland is of course an option, but if you stay in the United States during this time, maybe there will be other medical opportunities someday. I have to say that this damn America is not suitable for a leisurely retirement life. But if you want to do something, there is no more convenient place than this. Chapter 180 Preparation for the audiobook. As soon as word got out to the publishing industry that Audrey Hepburn was interested in voicing an audiobook, Henry, a small assistant, didn't even have to research which publishers were available. They came knocking. Even the agencies that had long worked with Audrey Hepburn presented her with a wide selection of options. They had meticulously sorted out all the factors, including the pros and cons, without Henry needing to help with the research. The reason for their enthusiasm was simple. Among the many audiobook categories, children's books are the best sellers. Add to that the Audrey Hepburn name, and it was clear to anyone that this was a sure-win venture. However, the longtime partners who had worked well with Audrey Hepburn had generally either retired or taken a backseat. Newer hires were left to handle the information, leaving the veterans merely a stepping stone, not responsible for the actual details. So, while the information presented was sufficiently detailed, it lacked the emphasis she'd come to appreciate, leaving her overwhelmed. Audrey Hepburn took off her reading glasses and put down the publishing company information she was holding. The young man from the agency sitting before her hurriedly asked, "Ms. Hepburn, do you have a publisher in mind?" "Sorry, I haven't decided yet," she said with an apologetic smile, then called to the man beside her, who was busy with other things. "Henry, come take a look and give me some advice." The young man who had been introduced as an assistant came over. Although this made the young man from the agency feel a little competitive, he didn't want to show off too much in front of the client. After all, there was no conflict of interest between the two of them. He simply didn't think the other had any right to dictate his preparations. Henry's original intention was that since someone had done the preparations, he should give them a chance to show their skills. But since the boss had called, there was no reason not to help. Picking up the stack of publishing company information, Henry read through it at a controlled pace, but to others it seemed as if he had just glanced at it. With an idea in mind, Henry said, "Boss, these audiobook publishers are all quite powerful. Their capital, structure, and market performance are similar. So, I suggest we approach this from a different angle." Audrey asked curiously, "What angle, boss? What stories do you want to tell, and what kind of stories do you want to tell them?" And then, how can these publishing companies help? Seeing the puzzled expressions on everyone's faces, Henry continued, because I'm not familiar with how the publishing industry works, I'm just sharing my thoughts. Just take it as a reference. After all, audiobooks aren't like regular literary works. We're just reciting existing stories. If we simply select children's stories to recite, are there any copyright issues with these stories? You have to know that the original Grimm's or Andersen's fairy tales aren't really suitable for children's literature. Therefore, modern fairy tales are often adapted and polished. Will this copyright issue cause any problems? So, boss, after you've chosen a publisher, how much of their copyright library will be available? Should we only choose from what the publishing company has, or can the publishing company handle the copyright issues if we find a story we like? Of course. It's best if the publishing company has a rich library of copyrights. Besides classic children's stories, could we consider some modern works, but those might be at the production stage, and editors at any publishing company would be able to handle them. So just treat it as some nonsense. I'm not familiar with the publishing business process. Does the knowledge in the library encompass everything? What a joke. It's not that comprehensive. Okay. Many things are simply impossible to know for those outside the industry. Even within the same industry, different companies may have their own corporate cultures and ways of doing things. Unless someone with experience in the industry guides you, who would bother writing a book to publicize these things? Even if everyone who needs the books buys them, the cost of printing them might not be covered, unless each book sells for a fortune. So, even if Henry pored over the library, he'd still be blind to this kind of thing. He can only speak based on his own thoughts, but before anyone else could comment, Henry continued, and don't forget, boss, your greatest strength isn't your voice. You're an actress, an Oscar-winning actress. Audrey Hepburn seemed a little confused when she heard this. This made him laugh, and he said, so what if I'm an actor? Can I perform it as a radio drama? This made Ms. Hepburn herself feel the same. He thought about it and asked, can it be done this way? Henry smiled and said, no one has ever done it before, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. But I don't recommend that you handle all the things yourself, boss. It's like making a movie, and what you are good at is being an actor. So we also need directors, photographers, composers and other creative people, and we also need a good script. So the question is, are there any publishing companies willing to propose a plan like this? Maybe some people will be interested, and some people will not be interested and withdraw. For publishing companies that are willing to cooperate, we only need to look at their production plans. Isn't it the same as reading scripts in the past? So who should we choose to cooperate with, boss? You should know better than anyone else. Can we do this? This time, Audrey Hepburn was asking the young man from the agency. Noticing the gaze and the question, the young man hurriedly said, if this is your request, Ms. Hepburn, I will convey it to the publishing company on your behalf and screen those who are willing to cooperate. Although Audrey Hepburn's box office appeal is far less than that of his heyday, she is qualified to make requests to the producers based on her status. Therefore, the agent can only negotiate with those publishers on his behalf. Instead of standing on the standpoint of the industry and asking the artists under their control to cooperate, just to complete a job, the agent can also get a commission. Ms. Hepburn no longer hesitated and said, well, please discuss this with a publishing company. Audrey Hepburn was also familiar with this kind of tug-of-war negotiation, and of course she didn't want to reach a result in one go. So the matter was handed over to the people from the agency to negotiate. After all, they could get commissions, and that was their job to handle such matters. And the response came faster than expected. The next afternoon, the people from the agency brought two people to meet Audrey Hepburn in the cafe attached to the hotel where she was staying. The other party seemed to have prepared a lot of information, and was not just talking about ideals with empty words. Chapter 181 Self-Recommended Collaborator. The agent introduced, Ms. Hepburn, this is Michael Weiner, originally a film producer and record producer. In 1985, he founded Dove Audiobooks, which is a very outstanding new company in the audiobook industry. This is Ms. Deborah Raffin, Mr. Weiner's wife. He is also a Hollywood actor and was nominated for a Golden Globe Award for Best Actress for his role in The Touch in 1981. Ms. Hepburn shook hands with Mr. Weiner cordially and even gave Deborah Raffin, also an actress, a kiss on the cheek, showing her affection. When both parties sat down, the coffee that Henry had ordered in advance was served on the table. But Michael Weiner couldn't wait to take out the materials in his briefcase and almost covered the entire table. Michael said, "Ms. Hepburn, you mention audiobooks in the form of radio dramas. Actually, I discussed a similar way of expression with my wife a long time ago. Simply put, it's a story being told by a person within a story, using this framework to form the content of an audiobook. For the second story layer, we plan to adapt works by Ms. Mary Shelton. The stories we can choose from include excellent works that have been adapted into Disney animations, such as Sleeping Beauty and Beauty and the Beast. There's no problem with copyright, as Disney's copyright doesn't cover audiobook adaptations of the original works. We plan to select 4 or 5 stories and edit them into approximately 1 hour of content, including the storytelling itself. We'll also include a soundtrack, rather than making the narrator the sole protagonist. While there's the concern that this might distract from the narrator's focus, I believe Ms. Hepburn won't mind such a minor detail and will approve of this richer expressive approach, making the audiobook even better." Audrey Hepburn asked curiously, "Your plan sounds great, so why haven't you done it before?" Michael smiled wryly and said, "In the audiobook market in the past, the literary work itself still held a center stage. Some people didn't even care who the narrator was. My approach further downplayed the importance of the narrator, making it difficult to find anyone willing to collaborate. The child actors I could hire cheaply didn't deliver the dialogue at the level I desired. This project was shelved until Ms. Hepburn requested a special audiobook format similar to a radio play. That's when we saw this opportunity." Audrey Hepburn looked at the documents on the table, the last sheet in the middle, with the title A French Woman's Magical Fairy Tale on the cover. "Is this a script?" Michael explained. "My wife and I conceived this script and then had it polished. It tells the story of a French woman who recalls her childhood when the composer Maurice Ravel visited her home and told her a story. If you're willing to participate in the audiobook, you will be the main character, acting in your own voice. Oh, of course, we'll just have to record the voice in the studio, so it won't be a big burden on you." Audrey Hepburn's health was a semi-public secret. After all, even her work as a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador was suspended. Anyone who wanted to know the reason would know. If any publishing company had demanded that a woman cooperate with promotional activities, hold book signings, and so on, such a company would have been rejected long ago and would no longer be on her list of potential partners. For a while, the only sound at the table in the cafe was the shuffling of papers. Audrey Hepburn, a devoted reader, certainly wasn't like many other dyslexic celebrities who needed someone to explain the script and dictate the lines to them. Hepburn read very quickly, and this wasn't when she was poring over the text, just skimming through it. The real difficulty was her presbyopia, which made reading the standard typewriter font a bit difficult. However, she managed to read the script in one sitting. He praised her. "The story is quite complete. And the music is supposed to be the Mother Goose Suite." "Yes. That's also by Maurice Ravel," Michael replied. "How do you plan to perform the music?" Michael said, "If I can work with Ms. Hepburn, I plan to find a symphony orchestra. I must ensure that every aspect is perfect. There's no need to deliberately seek out famous symphony orchestras. Hollywood has many excellent teams." "Oh, Mom, you are also from Hollywood. I believe you understand this aspect better than I do." Audrey Hepburn did not deny this. He pulled a pen from his handbag, pointed to the script in front of him, and asked, "Is it convenient? Please, please." "No problem," Michael said with a smile on his face. Ms. Hepburn discussed certain passages in the script with Michael and Deborah. Since Deborah was also one of the conceivers of the original script, she had a lot of ideas to share. However, these contents were basically like discussions that would only take place during the production stage. But now there is not even a contract. Judging from Ms. Hepburn's attitude, it seems that cooperation with this couple is almost certain. He has not thought about waiting for other publishing companies to propose plans to see if there are better opportunities. In fact, this is a very realistic side of the entertainment industry. There is no fair competition. There is only first come first served. And those who are well prepared will definitely have more opportunities than others. However, today is their first meeting after all, and the information in front of Ms. Hepburn cannot be considered finalized, so the discussions between the two parties are just touching upon the subject. If they want to use it as a real production plan, Michael and his wife still have a lot of things to revise. So for the next contract negotiation, Ms. Hepburn plans to let her agent come forward to negotiate with the other party according to past practices. However, some conditions can be discussed face to face. So the lady said directly, I hope that the proceeds from this audiobook can also be donated to charity. Of course, it is the portion after deducting the costs. The agent asked, Madam, do you want to donate it to the United Nations Children's Fund? Well, I think the amount will not be too much, and it is a long-term income. Donating to the Children's Fund is also possible, but do you have any other suggestions? The audiobook market is not big, but not small. But compared to the fundraising banquet that Ms. Hepburn held for the Children's Fund in New York, this income is really not impressive. But Ms. Deborah Raffin said at this time, Ms. Hepburn, if you are willing to donate to other charitable purposes, how about the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, ASPCA? They're also headquartered in New York, and their mission is to provide effective means for the prevention of animal cruelty in the United States, founded in 1866. They have quite a history. Hepburn nodded and said, then, please, agent, help me research the ASPCA. I'll make a decision later. I'll leave the negotiations to you. With that, the woman stood up, preparing to leave. Everyone else rose to see Audrey Hepburn off. Henry, the seemingly invisible assistant, followed closely behind. Chapter 182 Dove Recording Book Company. Dove Recording Books was originally founded in Michael and Deborah's garage, but now they also have offices and a dedicated recording studio in New York City. Henry drove Audrey Hepburn to the company's recording studio in a rented car. Deborah Raffin and the company's recording engineer were already waiting. The two women exchanged a warm kiss on the cheek, while Henry, the assistant, served coffee to everyone, especially the recording engineer. Kig, low fat and low caffeine, right? Oh, thanks, Henry. I feel sluggish all day without a cup of this in the morning. After serving the coffee, Henry pulled out a paper bag, opened it, and asked, we have sandwiches, hot dogs, and chocolate donuts. Which one would you like? Hot dog, the recording engineer asked, and Henry took out a hot dog and handed it to him. Unexpectedly, the other person snatched a bag and said, no hot dogs, I want everything else. Staring at the lone hot dog in his hand, Henry paused for a moment before saying, don't you think the little calorie gain you made from the coffee is not only lost on the sandwich and donuts, but you're also incurring a damned calorie debt yourself? Who told you to only buy the good stuff, damn kid? Those donuts from Papa Hood on the corner are a mad fake redemption. Same with Annie's sandwiches. Two women nearby were displeased, saying, hey, gentlemen, there are ladies here. Use polite language. The cowardly Kryptonian immediately apologized. Sorry, boss. The sound engineer shrank back, stuck out his tongue, and grimaced. As the two men stuffed their mouths with food, the two women discussed the recording content for today's session. Audrey Hepburn ultimately chose 4 children's stories: Sleeping Beauty, Tom Thumb, Beauty and the Beast, and Ledronit, Queen of the Pagodas. As a story within a story, his voice was recorded reciting the recording. Deborah Raffin, acting as producer, stayed in the studio. However, in terms of acting skills or experience, Deborah couldn't offer much guidance to the Oscar-winning actress. Therefore, their interaction wasn't like a director with an actor, or a producer with a singer. Instead, Deborah offered him her audience perspective and discussed with Ms. Hepburn whether a particular line could be expressed in another way. Henry and Kiger weren't idle, either, not only eating but also chatting. An original tape was playing, with headphones halfway up. As they listened to the rock music, they discussed, look, the low frequencies are best suited for bass and drums. Any other instruments should be removed if possible, according to the characteristics of the instruments. Emphasize certain aspects and remove unnecessary ones. This will ensure clean and clear sound across all frequency bands. We have to be very careful when using compressors and EQs because they are very powerful. Basically, we can make the sound fuller, smoother, more powerful, or cover up some singers' pronunciation errors through the adjustment of these two tools. But don't overcompress the audio track because it is too easy to use. This will make the sound intermittent and inconsistent. Because we have to consider the overall situation and the characteristics of the voice itself. As for those effects, I think they are used in the final stage, when modifying and establishing personal characteristics. During the recording stage, instead of thinking about the mixer, it is better to consider the configuration of the recording studio. Not all sounds are suitable for close-up recording. Although we have reduced the noise in the recording space, such a track will be dry and boring. The use of spatial reverberation can give instruments a sense of space and add a very unique tension. Even the instrument on the left, right, and center can have a different feel. That's why the lead singer is usually kept in the center. Besides the lead singer's central role, the spatial sense of the sound can't be ignored. Henry couldn't help but remark as he looked at Kiger's messy notes and listened to his explanations. Good boy, even though these things are all written in relevance books, if you haven't actually heard them, you really don't understand what the words in the books are talking about, Kiger said proudly. No matter how many books you read about these things, it's useless if you haven't heard them. And you also need a good pair of ears, otherwise you won't be able to hear the subtleties and can only rely on your feelings, thinking that this adjustment is good, that adjustment is bad. Then no matter how many books you read, you won't be able to understand what those masters said in the books, or you will just take those nonsense scams as your gospel. The worst thing is, the readers can't tell the real author from the fake. I've seen many so-called masters in the industry, but they actually just use the same formulaic routines. If the singers themselves lack talent, their work will be terrible. Henry's eyes lit up, and he asked with an expression of eagerness to hear gossip. So, who's your mentor? Any industry secrets? Jig smiled and said, What, master? I'm just an amateur. I started out as a submarine sonar operator, and I honed my skills by listening to whale calls while bored underwater. Have you ever heard whale calls? I'll play them for you. Without waiting for Henry to agree or refuse, Jig began rummaging through his cassette case. Soon, he had replaced the rock music with a whale tape. Henry put on both headphones and listened intently to the sounds of Earth's largest creatures. The sounds of the ocean floor are unique, completely different from those transmitted through the air, especially the layers of echoes. Combined with the high-frequency sounds of the whales, they are truly mesmerizing. Pulling up one earphone, Henry asked curiously, Did you record this on a submarine? How is that possible? Kiger chuckled. Submarine recordings, whether in combat or not, are classified. If they were to be released carelessly, it could be fatal. The whale sounds you're hearing were recorded by the Oceanographic Research Institute's exploration vessel. What you're hearing now isn't the fullest version. Just adjust the mixer a little, eh? Watching Kiger fiddle with an adjustment knob, Henry asked, Loss of contact again? Yeah, below -6 dB, it seems to stop working. Removing the panel from the mixer's base, Henry used a flashlight to peer at the tangled wires inside. Kiger, also crouching down to examine the situation, sighed, If you hadn't been here to fix this mess, I'd want to just cut it all off like Alexander the Great untangling the Gordian knot. This mad fake thing is older than me. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 183 Recording Progress. Henry held a screwdriver, a penlight between his lips, and remained silent. If he hadn't possessed this skill, would Kiger have been willing to teach him his secrets? And act so affectionately? It was precisely because this antique wasn't something many people could fix that Henry had the opportunity to become close to Kiger. For a Kryptonian who'd studied audio equipment and even built a home theater quality sound system in his rented apartment, repairing this antique mixer wasn't a big deal. The reason for the mixer's chaotic wiring was not only due to the builder's poor habits, but also due to several modifications. The subsequent modifications seemed to be a way of avenging the trouble the original creator had caused the modifier. Instead of meticulously tidying the wiring, the modifier added their own mess, compounding the chaos. Seeing this, Henry didn't dare rashly cut all the wires and rewire them neatly. The length of the wires would affect the sound, though the effect was subtle, but it would be noticeable to anyone with a keen ear. The reason Kiger kept using this mixer was because the company couldn't afford a high-quality, new one, so it was better to keep using this antique. At least this antique's performance wouldn't be inferior to those of the new, more expensive mixers. In this case, keeping it as it was the best option. The reason the adjustment knob had stopped working was indeed, as Henry had initially suggested, poor contact. Loose screws, aging wires, and brittle plastic packaging were all contributing factors to mixer malfunctions. The solution was quite simple: tighten the loose screws, and the copper core wires were well protected from aging. The packaging needed to be re-wrapped with insulating tape, but as long as it didn't short-circuit any other wires, it would be fine. And with this mess, there was no need to worry about the magnetic fields of the wires interfering with each other. That weak magnetic field would already be a tangled mess, making anyone lose their appetite. When Henry emerged from the mixer's pedestal, besides Keeger's unsurprisingly ugly face, Audrey and Deborah were also staring at the Kryptonian who had just repaired the machine. "Is it fixed?" Audrey Hepburn asked. "We're ready to record, boss. It's fixed." Henry looked at the sound engineer and said, "Kig, test it. If everything works, we'll start." Wearing headphones, Kiger adjusted the previously unresponsive controls. After confirming everything was working correctly, he gave Henry a thumbs up. "Okay, we're ready to start." Henry replaced the pedestal panel and took the assistant's seat. Audrey Hepburn also entered the studio, tested a few notes, and began the day's recording session. During the recording phase, the sound engineer simply ensured the sound was captured correctly. There wasn't much adjustment to do. Instead, the producer had to focus on the sound quality so they could respond promptly. Even with an actress of Audrey Hepburn's caliber, Deborah Raffin didn't dare slack off. Don't assume that every actress can pull it off in one take. After each segment, Audrey herself would listen to her recording and discuss with Deborah whether it was appropriate. For Deborah Raffin, a current actress, this was like a private lesson from the actress herself. While it wasn't full-scale acting instruction, the vocal and psychological aspects were similar. So, he couldn't help but focus on the task. Henry, now free, could have simply settled into a book. He didn't have any work to do during the recording phase. But Kiger, in this distracted work situation where he didn't need to concentrate, wanted to chat. If he were to get too caught up in his own work and focus too much on external matters, it would actually hinder the recording process. So, at times like these, Henry would chat quietly with Kiger. Most of the time, Henry would also put on a pair of headphones. While listening to Hepburn's voice, he would also listen to Kiger's suggestions for adjustments to the recorded sound. But today, Henry asked about something else. "Kig," he said, "do you know how Michael's progress is going?" Kig thought for a moment and replied, "Michael has hired Lalo Schifrin to conduct and has rented a large studio used by other symphony orchestras. The rent there is not cheap, and neither is the cost of hiring an orchestra. He's keeping a close eye on the progress. According to the production plan, it will probably be finished in the next day or two. Ms. Hepburn is also recording the final story, The Queen of the Pagoda. Once both are finished, we can move on to the next stage of production." Henry nodded and said, "Everything is going well." "That's great. What are your plans for the future, Ms.?" "Hepburn will be traveling to the West Coast for medical treatment in early November. If everything goes well here, she will probably stay in New York for the rest of the time to see if there's anything else that needs to be finalized with the recording. By November, I'm afraid she won't be available." "Do Michael and Deborah know about it?" Kig asked. "Yes, I've told them before." "When we began production," Henry explained, "we still had over a month to spare. Considering the woman's condition, we didn't schedule too much work. But we were also concerned about what would happen if something unexpected delayed production and prevented her from getting medical attention. Now everything's going smoothly, which is truly gratifying. God blesses those who are kind," Zig said, making the sign of the cross. Henry asked, surprised, "Are you religious? You don't believe?" Henry was stunned by the question. "Should I believe? What kind of God?" "Faith should be revered because it's unknowable, unfathomable, and inviolable. As the saying goes, distance creates beauty. But this is the Marvel Universe, and not all gods are good. Instead of believing in those things, I might as well believe in a dog. Besides, I'm most likely a Kryptonian. Even if I'm not a god like Superman, I'm at least a degraded version of him. I don't know what god I'd trust in, but I don't know what god could withstand a punch from me. But if we separate faith from God, can we believe in anything, even a mortal god? Superman, with his unwavering faith, is like a devout believer. Of course, his faith isn't in a god, but in his own convictions. So, what is his faith, or conviction? It's definitely not world peace, even if World War II broke out, with nuclear bombs flying everywhere, Henry wouldn't intervene. But actively pursuing something doesn't seem to be something he'd find compelling. It's rare for a Kryptonian to come to this world and confront his own heart for the first time. Chapter 184 Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Just like sound mixing, there are some things you can't truly learn from books without practical experience. In this area of knowledge, books are more like supplementary knowledge or foundational materials. A major area of this field is medicine. Without sufficient clinical experience, Henry, having only read medical books and journals, had a complete mess of human anatomy diagrams and meridian acupoint maps, Aside from a firm memory, perhaps the only area where his knowledge could be useful was in treating obvious injuries like bleeding and fractures. With his X-ray vision, he could pinpoint a bleeding point. The only remaining issue was how to stop the bleeding. However, Audrey Hepburn's condition was certainly not something that could be fully understood by the mediocre medical skills of a Kryptonian. After being referred from Switzerland to New York, and then from New York to Los Angeles, the lesion was finally identified at a consultation with doctors at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Sitting in the examination room, the attending physician explained the condition to Ms. Hepburn and Robert Wards. Although Henry, the assistant, stayed in the corridor, he still used his supervision and hearing to listen to the doctor's report. Ms. Hepburn, after our laparoscopic examination, we confirmed that this is an extremely rare abdominal cancer. We call it pseudomesenoma peritoneal carcinoma, abbreviated as PMP. This disease is most often caused by primary cancer of the appendix. Cancer cells produce a large amount of mucus or colloid ascites, which grows slowly over a few years and metastasizes to the small intestine in the form of a thin film coating to form a tumor. Tumors can cause tissue fibrosis and hinder the function of the digestive organs. If not treated actively, the resulting tumors and mucus will fill the entire abdominal cavity, compressing the organs and causing damage to the functions of the colon, small intestine, stomach and other organs. Fortunately, the cancer is still in the early second stage at this stage, that is, the tumor has left the primary side and begun to grow to other parts of the body, but has not yet spread to the lymph nodes. In other words, we're optimistic about the treatment outcome. With surgery to remove the site of disease, followed by chemotherapy, there's a good chance of recovery. But if left untreated, this type of cancer can be fatal, even without spreading throughout the body, leading to scurvy, intestinal obstruction, or other complications. So, as a doctor, we recommend aggressive treatment. As long as you're in good condition post-surgery, returning to your previous health shouldn't be a problem. However, given the possibility of recurrence, regular follow-up is still necessary. The attending physician laid out the situation clearly and without hesitation. After all, they'd saw treatment far and wide before finally finding their medical center. At this point, it would be too late to ask the patient to leave and leave the family to explain the situation. If it were truly that easy to treat, those hospitals would have been able to handle it, so it was better to be straightforward and clear. Audrey and Robert were both unusually calm. Audrey Hepburn had seen many storms. Even her childhood war experiences had taught her about life and death. Even though she was facing this situation herself, she remained calm. Robert Wards, having experienced this before, his first wife, Mail Oberon, died in 1979, was not overly emotional about Audrey Hepburn's illness. He simply followed a doctor's orders, and the rest was his fate. Without further deliberation or consultation, Audrey Hepburn resolutely declared, "Doctor, I agree to the surgery." "Okay, then, we'll schedule surgery for Ms. Hepburn in 2 days." Immediately, a nurse wheeled Ms. Hepburn back to her dedicated ward. In fact, Audrey Hepburn had been admitted to the medical center's ward since the start of her examination. Then, a series of tests were carried out in rapid succession. Unlike a typical hospital, where tests are ordered and then scheduled separately, then patients register for another appointment after the tests are complete. If any concerns remain, additional tests are scheduled, and the entire process begins again. It's safe to say that with this back and forth of examinations, diagnoses, re-examinations, and re-diagnosis, even the unlucky patient could die mid-sentence, before treatment even begins. However, the medical center is incredibly efficient. Once an appointment is made, while there's no saving on analysis time, the doctor will quickly inform the patient of the results as soon as they're available. It's like having a dedicated doctor serving a single patient. In reality, this is precisely the case. The medical center has an extremely low patient-to-patient ratio. This is precisely why the quality of care is so high. Those who manage to register are either wealthy or highly privileged, or have very specific conditions that attract the doctor's interest. With the speed of the medical center, surgery is scheduled 2 days later because abdominal surgery requires fasting. Otherwise, food residue could affect the patient, and doctors don't want to have to work like scavenging feces. Back in the ward, Audrey Hepburn briefly informed her assistant of her situation. After all, it wouldn't be good for someone close to her to remain in the dark. After listening, Henry asked, "Boss, do you need me to notify anyone else?" The woman thought for a moment and said, "Please notify Sean and Luca. No need for anyone else." Audrey Hepburn's 2 children were the most important and closest men in his life. As for ex-husbands and close friends, the woman didn't want to alert any of them. Henry, of course, had no objection, leaving Robert, the man closest to the woman, to make the calls himself. But Audrey Hepburn's whereabouts were still being closely watched. While it wasn't enough to attract paparazzi or the media, Henry's pager, BB call, was ringing almost non-stop. Having been by Hepburn's side for over a year, he had a pretty good idea of her friends and how close they were. So, as was her usual habit, Henry only replied to those close friends. He only told them that Hepburn was receiving treatment at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center and kept quiet about the rest. He only informed Sean Ferrier and Luca Dotti that she would undergo surgery in 2 days. The 2 young men were certainly not indifferent to their mother, and they also asked about her illness in detail. Henry relayed what Ms. Hepburn had told him before to the 2 young men. Almost at the end of the phone call, the 2 young men decided to book the fastest flight and fly to Los Angeles as soon as possible. For Sean Ferrier, a European film producer, he could leave at any time. But Luca Dotti was still in college and had to ask for leave first. However, this part had nothing to do with Henry. The 2 young men were adults and could handle their own affairs. Besides, he was just an assistant, not the housekeeper of the Hepburn family, and he didn't need to be so involved. Chapter 185 Post-Operative Visit. The operation went smoothly. Even as Audrey Hepburn was wheeled out of the operating room, her 2 children had already arrived. The warmth of family at such a time is something a lonesome individual can never experience. With her 2 children by her side, and Robert, a life partner of similar age, as their only bond, the family's presence was Ms. Hepburn's constant chatter. Henry, an outsider, tactfully left the ward and went up to the roof of the medical center for a cigarette. The nicotine in cigarettes wouldn't stimulate his Kryptonian constitution, it was simply a need for warmth to warm his lungs at such a moment. Since his heart was cold, and the worldly wisdom of outsiders was also cold, he might as well resort to external aids. Meanwhile, Henry carefully discerned every voice within the medical center, searching for those discussing cases and researching symptoms. The doctors who could enter the medical center were undoubtedly the best in their field. Their clinical judgments and thinking, compared to actual cases, were difficult to fully capture in medical books. While accompanying Ms. Hepburn to seek medical treatment, Henry also tried to find time to visit the library and browse medical books and journals. He realized that this path wasn't about simply reading a few books and developing X-ray vision, automatically becoming a renowned doctor. This was why Henry had remained a bystander regarding Ms. Hepburn's condition, acting as a caregiver, not a healer. He wondered if this feeling of helplessness was normal for a Kryptonian with a superhuman brain. To compensate for this, Henry tried to put himself in the shoes of a student, listening to the guidance of these renowned doctors. He didn't have the ability to read minds like Professor X, otherwise he wouldn't have bothered to see what these doctors were thinking. Then, an idea inexorably took hold. Should he practice on some unfortunate individuals to gain some clinical experience? The vibration and ringing of his pager interrupted Henry's thoughts. He glanced down at the device hanging from his waist, wrote down the number displayed, and wrote it down in his notebook. It wasn't that he distrusted his memory, but when he needed to show it to others, a notebook was the most intuitive record. It's not good to open your head and show it to others. If the number is familiar, you can naturally infer the general purpose based on the other party's identity. When replying, just a few words are enough. But if it's an unfamiliar number, there's a chance the person on the other end is truly unfamiliar, or it could be someone you know borrowing a pager in an unfamiliar place. In this case, if you don't return the call, you'll have no idea what the other party's purpose is. So Henry found a public phone in the medical center and called back. The call was connected immediately. Henry said, "This is Henry Brown, Ms. Audrey Hepburn's assistant. May I ask who just called the pager?" A familiar voice came from the line, saying, "Henry, this is Givenchy. How is Audrey?" Among Audrey Hepburn's friends and family, this fashion tycoon was undoubtedly the most important. Even if the woman herself was calling, she wouldn't want to hide the information from anyone else. So Henry replied directly, "Ms. Hepburn just had surgery today. The operation was successful. She has been transferred to a general ward and is recovering." There was a brief silence on the line. After all, this boss had called to show his concern before, and it was the woman who answered the phone herself. Henry hadn't deliberately tried to eavesdrop on how he was comforted. Henry, for his part, had only informed the 2 sons of everything. In response to other concerns, he'd simply replied with a formulaic statement about hospitalization. Now that the surgery was a success, there was no need to hide the concern from others. This was why Henry spoke frankly. When people are most vulnerable, genuine concern from others can be a source of support. However, excessive, insincere concern can become a burden. Henry couldn't sift through the woman's sincere and perfunctory expressions. But the friendship between Mr. Givenchy and the woman was undeniable. The silence on the line was like a sigh of relief, but also like an accusation for not informing him. Givenchy asked, "Who's there?" "Besides the boss's 2 sons, there's Robert. He's been by my side all this time." Givenchy only asked about those close to him, not those at work, so Henry ignored him. "Who else knows?" Givenchy asked again. "If no one else has leaked it, then you, sir, are the only one who knows, even among those who aren't there. I'll have to wait until my boss recovers a bit before I ask her if I should tell anyone else. The UN, too, will have to be informed sooner or later." "I see. Are you in Los Angeles, Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Department of Gastrointestinal Surgery?" "Yes, I'll be there as soon as possible. Please convey my regards to Audrey." "Yes, sir." He hung up the East Coast call, which meant Mr. Givenchy wasn't in Europe, but in New York. Just as he was considering whether to go back up to the rooftop for a smoke, another number rang on his pager. Then another, and another. Henry answered each one, taking notes. Most gave only a formal statement about hospital admission, not even mentioning the specific hospital. Some troublemakers simply replied with a no comment without saying anything. They were the kind of reporters trying to get information, and their handling was simple. Just chat with the other person, and then when the payphone's coin credit runs out, the call will kindly disconnect automatically. Since there are no coins anymore, it's a very useful excuse in this day and age. It's more effective than the excuses of the future like the connection is disconnected or due payment, and Mr. Givenchy's visit came much sooner than expected. He appeared at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center around noon the next day, holding a bouquet of flowers. After knocking on the door and entering the ward, he greeted the others before saying to his friend, who lay in bed, "Oh, Audrey, my dear friend. You should have told me this sooner," handing over the bouquet. The bouquet consisted mainly of carnations, violets, and baby's breath, mostly soft colors but not overly fragrant. Overpowering fragrance can sometimes be a burden on patients with respiratory problems. Henry accepted the flowers, whispered, "I'll go find a vase," and left the ward. Audrey Hepburn looked at her friend helplessly and said, "Telling you earlier would just make one more person upset and one more person helpless. What's the use? I'm fine now, and that's the most important thing." Of course, Givenchy nodded. Chapter 186 Post-Operative Recovery Arrangements. The vase provided by the medical center is a blue and white porcelain from the East. Of course, it can't be an antique, but a modern work. After adding water to the vase and inserting the bouquet, Henry returned to the ward with the flowers. Several people in the ward were discussing their next plans. Robert explained on her behalf, because chemotherapy and follow-up are still needed, we can refer her to the nursing home. But Audrey wants to go home instead of staying in the hospital. "Are you going back to Switzerland?" Givenchy asked. "What about chemotherapy?" "Then what about chemotherapy?" "The chemotherapy process is relatively simple. Cedars-Sinai agreed to issue a prescription and let the hospital in Switzerland cooperate. It's just a follow-up examination, and you have to come to Los Angeles in person." After listening to Robert's explanation, Givenchy looked at Hepburn lying powerlessly on the hospital bed. He said sympathetically, "You're in such a state, even first class would be difficult." Audrey Hepburn forced a smile and said, "Then stay a little longer, until you're better, and then fly back." "I hope to be home in time for Christmas." Givenchy, lost in thought, tapped the watch on his left wrist with his right fingers. After a moment, he suddenly said, "Leave it to me, leave it to you." Audrey, Robert, and the two gentlemen all shared a common puzzlement. Givenchy said, "I'll go and find a plane to borrow, modify it a little, and send you back as a medical aircraft. A regular airliner is possible, but it's more troublesome, and it requires coordination with the airline. A private jet is more convenient. Is that possible?" No one else could ask that question, only Audrey Hepburn could. "Of course, I'll take care of it. I know a lady just as kind-hearted as you. I'm sure she'll be happy to lend you a hand. Besides, it's such a trivial matter for her." "Really? If so, that's wonderful. But please don't cause any trouble to anyone else." Audrey Hepburn said. "Don't worry," Givenchy promised, patting his chest. But then he added, "But I need to borrow someone from you." "Lend someone? Who?" Patting Henry on the shoulder, who was standing behind the group, Givenchy said, "Lend me your assistant. You can't expect an old man your age to run around as energetically as a young man. I need a hand." "Yes, Henry, yes, young man." Two elderly people, the same question. Of course Henry couldn't say no. Besides, this was his boss's business. Henry bowed and said, "I'll do my best to serve you, Mr. Givenchy." "Excellent. Let's go then." Givenchy stood up and prepared to leave. In fact, he also wanted to stay and chat with his good friend. But he also knew that the patient who had just finished the operation needed rest more, rather than someone nagging beside him. Instead of staying and disturbing the other person's rest, he might as well do something to help. So after obtaining consent, Givenchy took Henry and left quickly. Henry, who followed Givenchy, certainly did not think that this fashion tycoon needed him to fight and kill. What he had to do should still be his old job, that is, the work of an assistant. In short, doing odd jobs. But you always have to know what the other person wants to do first, so that you can cooperate. So Henry asked, "Sir, who are we looking for?" "What should I do?" "Wait a minute, I'll make a phone call. I need to know where she is so I know where to go." In the public phone area, Givenchy dialed a few numbers, asked a few questions, and then said to Henry with a smile, "Great, they'll be at the farm for the next few days. We can just go and find them." "The farm? Do we have to drive or fly?" "It's in Upperville, Virginia. Do you know how to get there?" "We're going to Oak Springs Farm." Henry recalled the map of the United States he had memorized and the timetables for various modes of transportation. He said, "The fastest way is to fly from Los Angeles Airport to Washington Dulles International Airport. United Airlines has a flight this afternoon. If we go directly to the airport, we'll have plenty of time and even find a place to have lunch. From there, it's about an hour's drive to Upperville. If all goes well, we should be there before dinner time. We can also choose to stay in Upperville overnight and visit again tomorrow morning. Perhaps that would be less rude. I don't know his personality, so I don't know what to do best." After answering, Givenchy was stunned for a moment before he said, "Stunned? Are you serious?" Henry spread his hands and smiled without saying anything. There was no point in explaining to others that his memory was comparable to a future Google Maps traffic navigation system. Coming to his senses, Givenchy said, "No, let's just stay for a night. Dinner prepared by the Mellon family's exclusive chef isn't something everyone gets the chance to enjoy." "The Mellon family?" Henry asked. "The Mellon I'm thinking of," Givenchy said. "Yes, Paul Mellon. Oak Springs Farm is his family. Nearby, he runs the renowned Rockby Stables, home to many champion horses. But it's not him we're looking for. It's his wife, Rachel Lambert Mellon. A renowned horticulturist, art collector, and philanthropist. The Lambert family is one of the most prestigious in the United States. And Rachel herself was once commissioned by President Kennedy to redesign the White House Rose Garden. If there's a name hidden in the financial world of America, or even the world, it's undoubtedly the Jewish Rothschilds. But in the American industrial sector, towering over established families like the Rockefellers, DuPonts, and Fords, surpassing even the Carnegies, and even the emerging tycoon Howard Stark, who unexpectedly passed away last year, needs to look up to, that's the Mellons. Even this Rachel Lou Lambert is no ordinary daughter. Her father is the president of Gillette Razor Company and the founder of Warner Lambert Pharmaceuticals, and her grandfather, Jordan Lambert, is the inventor of Listerine mouthwash. Simply put, this couple exemplifies the essence of America's old money, the blue-blooded aristocracy. Powerful individuals who rarely step out in the spotlight, yet can easily stir up the storm. Henry wondered, how can I meet them? Why not? You're the face of Audrey Hepburn, Givenchy said. Chapter 187 Mellon. Henry recognized those names, not out of idleness, but to investigate the truly wealthy in America, preparing to go out masked and extort money when he was hungry. Rather, while accompanying Audrey Hepburn to a UNICEF fundraising gala in New York, he inevitably learned about the wealthy and generous donors in the charity world. Some names weren't necessarily on the invitation list, but because they were well known in the charitable community, no one knew if they would show up uninvited. Therefore, the research materials he hired a PR firm to investigate often included these names. Henry also perfectly demonstrated his ability as a superb assistant, remembering the advice old Tom had given him during their time in Alaska. There are many legal, convenient ways to get around in the United States, but you just have to know how to get there. In this case, transportation was simple. Just find the United Airlines counter number at Los Angeles Airport and make a reservation in advance. Then, find the car rental company number at Washington Dulles International Airport and make a reservation, specifying your arrival time. Just 2 simple phone calls made their trip incredibly smooth. There was no need to queue at the airport counter or wait for the car rental company to dispatch a vehicle. Givenchy had, of course, contacted the client in advance, providing his approximate arrival time, and the client naturally extended a dinner invitation. This alone speaks volumes about the influence of this fashion tycoon. He could simply visit the home of a hidden tycoon and be treated like a distinguished guest. Even Audrey Hepburn herself might not have received such treatment. However, Givenchy had invested heavily, purchasing a bottle of Louis XIII French cognac at the airport. Compared to a fine bottle costing a few dozen ounces, this kind of stuff, costing thousands of ounces, would make even an unworldly person shudder. After a single trip on a crabbing boat, he couldn't handle more than a few bottles of this kind of wine. As planned, Henry arrived at Oak Springs Ranch before dark. There wasn't the usual guardhouses every 3 or 10 steps. Instead, it was a seemingly ordinary farmstead with a sense of history. Most importantly, the architectural style wasn't that modern minimalist, claiming to emphasize design but ultimately lacking in practicality. Come to think of it, my stereotype of grand European and American houses stemmed from the South American thugs in movies. They were in the U-turn business, so naturally they needed ample security. The owner here ran a legitimate business, not a life-threatening one. While there was a security team and some not-so-secret surveillance cameras, it wasn't the kind that required constant armed guard duty. The Mellons stood at the entrance of the mansion to greet their guests. Once the car parked, a Mellon servant naturally opened the door and welcomed Givenchy, a fashion icon. Henry, however, looked around, unsure where to park. Just as the Mellons approached the driver's seat, Henry smiled and asked, "Hello, where should I park, sir? Please leave the car with us." "No need to bother you, sir. Well, I'm just an assistant." No need to bother. Henry didn't quite understand the etiquette of such a family. While it's occasionally seen at fundraisers, the etiquette there differs from that of visiting someone's home. The Mellons waiter politely said, "Everyone's a guest once inside. Please don't worry, sir. After all, this was the driver's seat, not the passenger seat, so he wouldn't offer to open the door for them." Henry, like a country bumpkin, trembled as he got out of the car and handed it to the Mellons waiter. In that brief moment of contact, Henry discerned mutant features. Strange scales covered the arms and backs of the hands, but his abilities were unknown. The mutant waiter then parked the car in the garage. Givenchy, who had been greeting the couple at the door, called out to the newly exited assistant, "Henry, come here. Let me introduce you." Once the assistant arrived, Givenchy introduced them. "This is Mr. Paul Mellon, and this is Mrs. Rachel Lambert Mellon." The wealthy couple exuded an aristocratic air, without the slightest hint of incongruity unbecoming of their age, and certainly without any trace of slovenliness or slovenliness. Compared to traditional European aristocrats, they lacked titles. But their lifestyles were perhaps even more affluent. Their demeanor and expressions betrayed none of Tony Stark's youthful arrogance. Instead, they were genuinely kind. One could only say they'd lived comfortably to this age, becoming at least as intelligent as they could be. "Good day, sir, Mom. I'm Henry Brown, assistant to Ms. Audrey Hepburn." Henry didn't offer a business card or a handshake. The disparity in status between them was too great, and he was the younger generation. If the elders didn't express any interest, there was no need to be presumptuous. And, frankly, Henry didn't want to deal with this old money. Power and wealth always spell trouble. In the eyes of these people, he was merely Audrey Hepburn's agent. Givenchy was the one who could speak to them. He could just remain invisible. It was like Henry's principle in attending those fundraising events, following Ms. Hepburn's lead. Just listen, don't speak. Pretend you don't exist until someone specifically asks you something. As expected, while the Mellons' attitude toward Henry didn't show any overt contempt or dislike, a lingering sense of alienation remained. It was as if a chasm existed between two classes of people. Henry, of course, had no objection. He was just driving and booking plane tickets for Mr. Givenchy. Who the hell was he? Paul Mellon said to Givenchy courteously, "Come on, We'll talk at the table. Knowing you were coming, I had our chef prepare everything to treat you. Haha, I've had more than one friend rave about your chef's cooking. I'm definitely going to try it today." The two men walked ahead. Ms. Rachel Lambert didn't ignore Henry, the young guest, but affectionately took his arm and let him in. At the same time, he asked, "How is Ms. Hepburn?" He wasn't sure how much to say, but he remembered that he had come with Givenchy to ask for help, and the reason would sooner or later be known to them. Henry said honestly, "Ms. Hepburn just had surgery yesterday. It went very smoothly. She is recuperating at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center." "Oh, what is it?" "Can you tell me?" "It's a rare form of appendiceal cancer. Hospitals in Switzerland and New York couldn't find the cause, but fortunately, the doctors at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center used their superb skills and successfully solved the problem. God bless the kind person." Mrs. Rachel Lambert, who was probably older than Ms. Hepburn but in better health, said a prayer for her. Chapter 188 Oak Springs Farm. From the moment Henry drove into the area, Oak Springs Farm's extraordinary beauty was evident. Unlike traditional Chinese or European imperial courtyards, the grounds here resemble a botanical garden, each area possessing distinct personalities. Yet, each distinct area is infused with subtle ingenuity, creating a harmonious interplay between living plants and inanimate sculptures, supports, and railings. All of this is personally managed by Mrs. Rachel Lambert, worthy of her reputation as a gardener. Compared to the vibrant gardens, the farm buildings themselves are merely a few low, gray-tiled, white-walled houses, lacking even a second floor or attic, making them exceedingly plain. But upon entering, one discovers something completely different. Artwork is displayed throughout the house, and paintings cover the walls. Or perhaps it's better to describe it as using art as furniture, using classic paintings as wallpaper. Every scene and every object resembled something you'd see and use in an ordinary home: curtains, window frames, cabinets, chairs, lamps, vases, and so on. Even the cups, plates, and teapots displayed in the glass cases were exquisitely crafted, each radiating a harmonious aesthetic. Apart from the paintings on the walls, there were no true decorations in the house. Everything was usable. Yet, every detail flaunted a wealth unattainable for mortals. Upon entering, one could see a wall covered in Renaissance masterpieces, including Mona Lisa, Madonna of the Flowers, Madonna and Child with St. John, the Childhood of Bacchus, and the Sleeping Venus. This collection likely encompassed masterpieces by Giorgione, Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, Bellini, and Titian. Most of Michelangelo's works were on the church walls. The melons hadn't been so frantic as to pry the walls off, otherwise the whole place would have been complete. Henry, stunned by the wall, was stunned for a moment before he realized the people around him were staring at him. Henry quickly collected himself, sorted out his expression and said, "Sorry, I lost my composure." Givenchy laughed and said, "It's okay. They always like to play little pranks on new guests. And your performance is just the kind that satisfies their weird mentality." Henry cooperated very well and smiled and asked, "Well, which kind? Are you wondering if the paintings on this wall are all real?" Henry said with a wry smile, "It's hard not to think so. Paintings of this period can hardly be found in such a complete range even in art galleries. If it were an ordinary family, it would be fine, but this is the Mellon family's Oak Springs farm." Paul Mellon stood up and said proudly, "More than 90% of the artworks circulating on the market and seen in museums or art galleries are fakes." Perhaps those museums or art galleries have a better sounding way of saying it, that is, most of what they exhibit are replicas, and they don't use the term fakes. Of course, I don't deny that some fakes are so good that even museum experts can't tell. But don't mistake me for someone who would take the real thing home and casually display it. Artifacts like these, carrying the weight of history, should be treasures belonging to all of humanity. To properly preserve them, they should be stored in a constant temperature and humidity environment. Any damage is a disrespect for human history. Some wealthy individuals enjoy displaying genuine art, wantonly trampling on our history. The question is whether the authentic works they've spent so much money on are truly as authentic as the sellers claim. I've seen people brag to me more than once, claiming that the museum pieces are fakes and they have the real thing. But after taking a look, I find it ridiculous. Such people lack even the most basic appreciation of authenticity, or perhaps they don't care whether the objects they hold are real or fake. They simply want to demonstrate their power. My husband and I have dedicated ourselves to the development of the National Art Museum and have donated many works of art. This kind of disrespect for history is something we must avoid, but if you see Impressionist or non-Impressionist works, from the 19th and 20th centuries, elsewhere in the house, they're collected by my wife, Rachel. Reproductions aren't intentionally displayed for these more recent and contemporary works. But I have to say, oftentimes, even after hearing my explanation, guests stubbornly insist the Mellons don't collect fakes, thinking I'm joking or trying to evade the point. So, Paul Mellon shrugged. So, Henry pointed to the Renaissance-themed wall at the front and asked, "Are all these fakes?" Paul Mellon graciously admitted, "Yes. But most reproductions or copies in museums and art galleries are deliberately resized or marked in conspicuous places, so, what you see are all high-quality forgeries that I've either purchased or had made, to greet new friends, and most of those who know the inside story are happy to play along, keeping it a secret from those who don't. So I hope you don't mind." What else could Henry say about the bad taste of the rich? This is just like the Hogwarts sorting ceremony in the Harry Potter novels. Everyone knows what it is, but they all make up nonsense just to scare the new students who are still unaware. Today, Henry is the rookie who just enrolled and was fooled by a few old men and women. "But," Henry said uncertainly, "can I take a closer look?" Paul Mellon waved his hand, and his wife Rachel Lambert asked carefully, "Henry, do you think there's any problem?" Henry walked up to the painted wall and sniffed here and there. Then he turned and asked, "According to your appraisal results, you also think that this Leonardo da Vinci's lady with an ermine is also a fake. Do you think this lady with an ermine is different?" Rachel asked back. Henry explained, "The aging of oil paintings is different from other works of art. There is no chemical material that can achieve it quickly. But the aging technique is relatively simple. It's nothing more than baking in an oven and then ironing it flat. Finally, it's smoked to give the painting the scent of age. They don't use wood to start the smoke, but rather commercial cigarettes. But there's a subtle difference between the smoke and the aroma of centuries of sedimentation. I smell Marlboro, West, Winston, Lucky Strike, and so on here. But the painting itself doesn't have those scents." Henry was referring to the Leonardo da Vinci masterpiece, Lady with an Ermine, which he considered questionable. "Are you sure?" Paul Mellon asked, frowning. "Think of it as a dog's nose. It's pretty good most of the time." Chapter 189 Private Jet Borrowing. The incident before the painting didn't dampen everyone's mood for dinner. Paul Mellon didn't comment on the painting, perhaps because he'd seen plenty of young people like Henry, looking to attract attention. Henry certainly wouldn't dwell on it either. Perhaps it was just a different aging technique. Besides, even if he'd found a bargain, no one would let him take the painting. In fact, after he'd expressed his doubts, he felt a flicker of regret. Old money like Paul Mellon and Rachel Lambert couldn't be compared to a young brat like Tony Stark. He'd embarrassed them, but he hoped it wouldn't jeopardize Ms. Hepburn's situation. Givenchy, however, didn't say anything. His conversation with the Mellons remained relaxed and at ease. Henry, still playing the role of a nobody, executed his learned table manners with impeccable perfection. He didn't even bother complimenting the food, even though it was delicious. No one cared. To put it bluntly, his seat at the table today was thanks to Audrey Hepburn. Without the aura of being the agent for that lady, he would have been sitting at the same table with the other waiters at the Mellons. So Henry was content to enjoy his meal in peace. During the casual conversation, Givenchy revealed his destination for the day. "I'm here today for Ms. Audrey Hepburn," he said. "I heard Ms. Hepburn is in the hospital." "Is everything okay?" Paul Mellon asked. Rachel Lambert answered first. "She's had surgery, and everything went well, right, Henry?" Putting down his soup spoon, Henry wiped his mouth and replied, "Yes, Mom." "So how can we help?" Paul Mellon asked again. Givenchy said, "Paul, the truth is, I'd like to borrow your private jet to take Audrey back to her home in Switzerland for Christmas. I've already visited her, and she's in the same weak state as someone recovering from surgery. If she were to take a regular airliner, even first class, she'd probably be uncomfortable, and there would be concerns about her recovery. Booking a medical charter flight with an airline would not only be troublesome, but also restrict them to the airline's arrangements. That's why I thought of you too, hoping you could help. Otherwise, Audrey would have to stay in Los Angeles until she's well enough to take a long-haul flight." "Would you mind asking about Ms. Hepburn's surgery?" Paul Mellon asked. They were almost done with their meal, and the soup they had was a light mushroom soup. It shouldn't affect anyone's appetite, but Henry still asked, "Would you mind telling me now, please?" "Okay," Henry said, arranging his words. Ms. Audrey Hepburn has a rare form of appendiceal cancer that has spread. It's stage II, and she's still in a state where she can still undergo surgery, so, 2 days ago, she underwent a laparotomy at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The incision was about 15 centimeters, and the operation lasted about 2 hours. It was a success. Post-operative follow-up and chemotherapy will be required, and the first follow-up visit with the Cedars-Sinai physicians is scheduled for 3 days. If the post-operative recovery is smooth, she will be transferred from her current ward to the nursing home. However, rather than simply receiving nursing care, Ms. Hepburn prefers to return to her home in Switzerland, where life is simpler. The physicians at Cedars-Sinai are optimistic about her recovery. There is no such thing as minimally invasive surgery these days. The larger the area of surgery, the larger the surgical field of view. If it was just ordinary appendicitis, the surgical wound would be between 5 and 10 centimeters. But Audrey Hepburn also had part of her intestines affected by the spread of cancer cells removed, so the wound was larger. At the age of the Mellons, with their emphasis on health and wellness, even if they did not have professional medical knowledge, they still knew some surgical common sense in post-operative conditions. So there was no need for Henry to provide photos to illustrate. They could roughly imagine the situation. Especially since the lady was already thin, it would probably not be so easy to recover from the weakness after the operation. The couple looked at each other. Paul Mellon nodded slightly, and Rachel Lambert smiled and said to her friend, "My husband and I have no plans to travel or use the plane for the time being, so we agreed to lend the plane to Ms. Hepburn." Taking into account Ms. Hepburn's post-operative condition, the aircraft may need to undergo a certain degree of modification before it can be used for medical purposes. "We will bear all the costs of these modifications and the flight expenses. You can tell Ms. Hepburn not to worry about these trivial matters and just focus on taking care of herself. When she recovers, she can come to Oak Springs and we can have a good chat." Givenchy said happily, "Madam, we are honored by your permission. I would like to express my gratitude to you on behalf of Audrey. I heard that she has been committed to UNICEF's charitable activities in recent years, helping many poor children around the world. What we can do to help is just a trivial matter." "Please don't mind," Rachel Lambert replied. Paul Mellon said, "Let us raise our glasses," and everyone raised their red wine glasses with him, "to Ms. Audrey Hepburn's speedy recovery. I wish you a speedy recovery." With that, everyone took a sip of wine, according to their capacity. Some drank more, some less. But generally speaking, the host wouldn't put down their glass, and the guests kept chugging. It wasn't that the host was afraid of the guests drinking, it just looked awkward. The purpose of today's trip had been a complete success. This made Givenchy even happier. His face flushed, and he couldn't wait to fly back to Los Angeles to tell him the good news. Seeing Givenchy getting impatient, Rachel Lambert said, "Haha, my good friend, stay the night. It's a rare visit from you, and we haven't had a good chat. Besides, Paul has recently acquired a lot of collections, and he wants to hear what you, a fashion icon, have to say. If you just run away, he'll have nothing to show off to, and I'll be in trouble." In fact, seeing Givenchy's willingness to leave, even Henry looked at his remaining glass with embarrassment. Kryptonians are not naturally intoxicated by ordinary alcoholic beverages. Henry drank this stuff like water. But the others didn't know. Givenchy said helplessly, "Boy, drink with confidence. We are not leaving today and will stay here for one night. This is a treatment that ordinary guests don't have, so cherish it." "Yes, thank you sir and madam," Henry replied. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 190 Stable Invitation. The night passed in silence. The world wasn't so full of conspiracies. While Paul Mellon was the direct heir to the family, the real power in the Mellon family lay in the hands of his cousin, Richard Mellon. Paul was devoted to art and horse breeding, his most dedicated work being the creation and expansion of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. He lived a carefree life. His wealth had already ensured he had plenty of food and clothing, so there was no need to resort to the nightly ritual of sharpening knives before guests arrived. Henry woke early in the morning, washed up, and wandered the grounds. If the house was filled with valuables, he wouldn't dare wander without the owner's guidance. He'd be misled into thinking he'd been vandalized or stolen. But the grounds were less of a concern. Rachel Lambert wasn't crazy enough to decorate her garden with pearls and gemstones. As long as Henry didn't use those scissors to vandalize, no one would bother him. Ordinarily, though. But early in the morning, he was caught red-handed by Paul Mellon, a wealthy man. Henry Brown? Yes, Mr. Mellon. Good morning. Although he didn't know what he was being called upon for, Henry still greeted him politely. Do you like horses? Interested in visiting my stable? It's much more photogenic than all these flowers and plants, haha. Recording that and playing it in front of my wife would be the prelude to a major battle. Just be so clear, isn't it? Henry didn't voice his inner complaints, instead smiling and saying, my only knowledge of horses is from TV and books. It would be a real honor to see one in person. Well, then, walk with me, young man. Seeing the white-haired old man waving, Henry also wanted to see what the stables of this renowned horse breeder looked like, so he happily followed. The stables were not far from the farm, and the group, including Paul Mellon's entourage, arrived in an electric cart similar to a golf cart. Thoroughbred horses, used specifically for racing and equestrian events, were developed in the 17th and 18th centuries by the British, who imported Arabian horses and crossed them with local horses. Honestly, it's not pure at all. Unlike other animal species, where the term pure has a very different meaning, a thoroughbred horse can be considered a breed in its own right. A high-quality thoroughbred is characterized by a slender head, long neck, tall stature, deep chest, short back, strong hindquarters, slender body, and long legs. These traits have shaped modern stereotypes about horses, to the point that other breeds, especially ponies, can almost be mistaken for different creatures. The global popularity of British thoroughbreds is due to the promotion of horse racing and the considerable profits it generates. This, in particular, has led to ranches around the world capable of breeding horses to focus on producing faster and better thoroughbreds. This has also given rise to a new era of horsemanship. Just like yesterday, when discussing gardening, Lady Rachel Lambert could talk endlessly, seemingly for 3 days and 3 nights. While Givenchy, the fashion magnate, was quick to grasp the intricacies of design, the other two men were less perceptive. Even though Henry tried hard to follow their thinking, he was always a step behind the times. It was as if his super brain had frozen, unresponsive. Paul Mellon shared a similar passion when it came to horse racing. He not only detailed each horse's strengths but also meticulously memorized its sire and dam's lineages, as well as its career achievements. It was as if he possessed a super memory, retaining every last detail. Henry could only sigh at the seemingly limitless potential of people for their passions. Of course, Henry had no aversion to horses. 100 or 80 years ago, this place would have been a luxury car showroom. Each one was a premium, classic, limited edition sports car, easily capable of 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in seconds. As they approached the training grounds, Paul Mellon enthusiastically said, "Come on, Henry, come see my favorite horse, Ocean Hero, a graceful brown stallion." He paced in small circles around the training grounds, following his trainer's instructions. Paul Mellon, of course, had another cryptic list of pedigrees and racing records. It felt like my own pre-time travel self, always fond of discussing gaming with my few friends, always enjoying trotting out numbers. However, in the real world, quantifying a racehorse's abilities is difficult. All people can talk about are its racing results and the achievements of its sire and dam's lineages. Henry always responded appropriately and timely. It was a shame he hadn't been able to ride a horse and experience the thrill of a gallop. But it made sense, considering he'd said he had no riding experience. How could someone who loved horses so much let someone like him ruin his own horses? He was quite generous, after all. Henry was actually a little puzzled by Paul Mellon's enthusiasm. Even though it was his passion, he couldn't help but find an audience to show off. But what merit did he have? If he just wanted to listen to this old man's horse talk, Henry believed he could find someone in his circle, a different one every day. He might even reach the end of his life before his time was up. And these people would surely offer even more flattery, keeping the old man beaming. Was there any need to chat with a young man without connections or strength, meaning, of course, wealth or power, about all this? He sipped the black tea his servants brought him, soothing his dry mouth. Paul Mellon suddenly asked, "Henry, are you interested in working for me?" Instantly, Henry understood. Perhaps word of the abilities he had demonstrated when applying for the position of Ms. Hepburn's assistant had spread among a small circle of people, having been passed around by Alex Hart, The boss. Henry could hardly imagine a second possibility that could have so warmed up the boss, who had been so cold yesterday. And this also meant that his intelligence had been uncovered in just one night. He wondered how much they knew. Henry smiled, pointing to the waiters with vaguely mutant features following the tycoon. He said, "Mr. Mellon has so many talented people under him. Why would he be interested in my abilities, which can be replaced by buying a few bulletproof briefcases? I know people like you need respect and protection, so you can live a normal life. And what I need is protection. It's a win-win exchange, isn't it?" Looking at the waiters with mutant abilities, their arrogant demeanor truly proved the saying, "A seventh-rank official in front of the Prime Minister is a typo." Henry smiled helplessly and said, "Mr. Mellon, I'm currently Ms. Audrey Hepburn's assistant. And right now, Ms. Mellon needs help, I understand." Paul Mellon held out a solid black business card with the gold lettering. "So when you think the time is right and you're looking for a new job, feel free to contact me." It seemed his life wasn't in danger, so he was scrambling to find someone who could take the bullet. Was it simply a collecting addiction? Henry accepted the card and said, "I understand. I hope to serve Mr. Mellon someday." His inner thoughts, power and wealth, stay away. The boss has given him a way out, so don't be so tactless as to sabotage his own escape and embarrass himself. But seriously, Henry didn't really want to be kept in captivity. That kind of life would be too boring. Just like the horse in the stable before him. Even if he could run, he'd only be able to enjoy it on the track or the training ground. How could he realize the vastness of the world or the height of the sky? Chapter 191 Discharge. Paul Mellon and Rachel Lambert's private jet was a small Gulfstream private jet. It had only 6 seats, each with adjustable ergonomically designed sofas and a dedicated coffee table. The decor wasn't overly luxurious, but rather focused on comfort. However, to transport Audrey Hepburn, the aircraft's interior was modified. This involved removing 2 sets of tables and chairs and replacing them with a hospital bed, along with space for medical equipment. This wasn't just a room where you could just make room. The aircraft was in motion, and everything needed to be secured for safety during takeoff and landing, as well as for potential turbulence in the air. But this wasn't a major issue for Gulfstream's technicians. As a manufacturer of high-end, custom-designed private jets, they'd encountered all sorts of clients. Simply submit a request and they'd immediately come up with a solution. Henry then contacted the team at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, and the two sides coordinated to come up with a modification plan that met Ms. Hepburn's needs. Since it was only a temporary modification, with no changes to the overall layout, and the Mellons' expedited request, the modification was completed quite quickly, in just 2 weeks. In fact, if Henry had the materials and the modification plan, he could have completed it in less than a day. However, this is similar to most manufacturers' warranties. If you want peace of mind and full future service and coverage, you have to leave it to the original manufacturer. Unauthorized modifications will void many services and guarantees. Even in the event of a malfunction or accident, the insurance company might deny the claim due to violation of the company's warranty. This meant that Ms. Hepburn would need to remain at the medical center for post-operative recovery monitoring, as long as she returned to Switzerland before Christmas. Therefore, there was no need to rush the aircraft modification. During this time, besides Robert Wold staying by her side and providing attentive care, her youngest son, Luca, returned to Europe to continue his studies, and her eldest son, Sean, returned to work. Givenchy was probably the busiest person, juggling his own work with Ms. Hepburn's affairs. Thanks to Henry's help, most of the contact and document delivery work fell to this assistant. He would only fly to the US when Givenchy absolutely needed to be present. Needless to say, Henry's role was merely to run errands. But don't underestimate this kind of work. Take, for example, Creative Artists Agency, CAA, one of Hollywood's largest agencies. Many future big-name agents started out in the mailroom, at the very bottom of the company. Working in such a place allows one to quickly understand what's happening and where to go. Whether one can follow this path and build a network depends on one's ability. Similarly, although Henry was just running errands, what kind of people did he interact with? Even hidden tycoons like the Mellon family were able to meet them, so would Givenchy's errands be for ordinary people? While running errands doesn't always involve meeting the highest-ranking officials, these people wouldn't easily cultivate a friendship with an assistant to a washed-up star. But these people still have connections. Those assistants and clerks were the ones Henry could easily interact with. while a close relationship wasn't necessarily established in just 1 or 2 meetings. At least Henry knew where to look when faced with any problem. This wasn't the internet of tomorrow, where searching for answers to most questions was a simple matter. It was an era where ordinary people wouldn't even know where to find an incense burner. While it wasn't certain whether these connections would be useful in the future, the matter concerning Ms. Hepburn still needed to be handled, so he kept this information handy. Perhaps it would come in handy someday. After all this busy work, it was finally time to leave Los Angeles. In fact, if a young person had spent the extra 3 weeks at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, they might have been able to recover from that level of surgery. However, Ms. Hepburn was an elderly woman, and her recovery from the war as a child had left her with underlying health issues, so her recovery from the surgery was less than ideal. Even so, the doctors at the medical center didn't require her to stay for follow-up care. In their experience, maintaining a positive attitude was more important than meticulous medical care for those of a certain age. Simply put, coaxing an elderly person is like coaxing a child. Try to accommodate their wishes. Since she wanted to return home to Switzerland, then go back. Staying at the medical center, with a gloomy face all day, would be a source of worry even if she wasn't ill. So, on the appointed day, everyone prepared to depart. Henry rented a van suitable for medical care, as Audrey Hepburn was now able to move around briefly and no longer needed to be confined to a hospital bed or wheelchair. The specially modified van also ensured a comfortable ride for the woman. This was Los Angeles, the metropolitan city nestled within Hollywood, with a reporter density rivaling that of Washington, D.C., and the Big Apple. The all-powerful uncrowned king somehow managed to get the news of Hepburn's discharge. Fortunately, Cedars-Sinai Medical Center is a top-tier medical institution, with excellent privacy protection for its VIP clients. Reporters wouldn't dare cause trouble at a medical center of this caliber. Otherwise, even with the integrated security, bandaging, and hospitalization services, they wouldn't be able to win a lawsuit. This wasn't just some small hospital, or a place with unscrupulous, unaffiliated doctors. No one in the inner circle of power would go to great lengths to defend a truly life-saving unit. Who knows when they might need it? So the reporters were effectively kept outside the hospital grounds. Furthermore, Henry had cunningly contacted the Screen Actors Guild, with whom he hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years, and through Marion, found a few child actors and rented a duplicate car. With a clever sleight of hand, he drew the reporters' attention to the medical van, which was unaware of the situation and merely following the plan. They were then forced to swarm after it. The reason for this fuss was mainly because of the patient aboard. Henry didn't want to engage in a car chase through the streets with a bunch of frantic reporters. The child actors, however, were tactful and refrained from asking unnecessary questions. After the reporters were distracted, they could proceed as they pleased. Even if they finished early, it was still a day's pay for nothing, so there was nothing wrong with that. The car carrying the woman smoothly made its way to Santa Monica Airport, the closest airport to the medical center. There, the modified Gulfstream jet, borrowed from the Mellon family, was ready for takeoff. Chapter 192. On the way home, Givenchy, who had been waiting for a long time, welcomed her with open arms, saying, "Audrey, my dear friend." The woman in the wheelchair gave her friend a warm kiss on the cheek. Then, Givenchy and Robert shook hands. Henry, meanwhile, was going through immigration with customs officials, as the plane was leaving the United States for Europe. Henry had always believed that the privilege of using the VIP or diplomatic channels at customs was the highest level of privilege. But he had no idea that when he departed on this Mellon family plane, customs officials would directly handle the formalities on the tarmac. There were no extra checks, just stamps were issued. This truly opened Henry's eyes, revealing the true meaning of privilege. The woman, lifted from her wheelchair, was supported by her 2 beloved men and boarded the Gulfstream jet. The interior was filled with flowers, a scene that would scare anyone with hay fever, even without a nasal allergy. Henry, carrying the wheelchair onto the plane, marveled at the romantic ways of foreigners. No matter what age, you can have fun, as long as there's still romance between 2 people. He helped Ms. Hepburn onto the specially constructed hospital bed, lifting the front section so she could sit comfortably. Henry and the flight attendant, a qualified nurse, checked the bed seatbelts. They had to be properly secured. However, the roar of the plane's engines still made Audrey Hepburn feel uncomfortable, and she frowned. Robert noticed her expression of discomfort and asked, "What's wrong?" Audrey Hepburn said helplessly, "The engine noise is a bit loud." Maybe it'll get better after takeoff. The Gulfstream's soundproofing and airtightness were excellent, but Ms. Hepburn, in her frail state, couldn't withstand the strain. Henry, prepared, pulled a pair of earphones and a Walkman from his luggage, placed them on Ms. Hepburn's ears, and pressed play. Henry asked, "Are you feeling better?" Audrey Hepburn was surprised by the effect of the headphones, but of course, due to their function, she couldn't hear what Henry said. She just gave him a look of wide-eyed surprise. Helplessly, Henry could only remove one earmuff and ask, "Is the engine noise any better with the headphones on?" "Yes, much better. So, what kind of music do you want to listen to?" Henry opened a small handbag in front of the woman, filled with tapes. There were classical and pop music. He shook a Walkman in his hand, which was already playing Mozart's music, slow and soothing. Ms. Hepburn said, "This one will do. I'll change it after we finish listening." "Okay," Henry said, letting go of the earmuffs and letting the woman sit comfortably on the bed. Givenchy and Robert were both amazed by the performance of the Walkman Henry had produced. They asked, "Can listening to music while flying really reduce the discomfort caused by external noise? Why didn't I feel any effect when I tried it before?" Henry, seated, pointed to his ear and replied, "It's not the Walkman or the music that's working, it's the headphones. You know, airplane and helicopter cockpits are incredibly noisy, making communication between pilots and the control tower a major challenge. To ensure pilots can communicate, their headphones are specially designed with noise cancellation. This technology was patented in 1934, but it wasn't used in headphones until 1978, with mass production starting 3 years ago. It's just that the headphone manufacturers only supply them to the military and haven't produced them for civilian use. I thought they might be useful, so I made a set myself. Since the technology already existed, it wasn't a groundbreaking feat. So, neither Givenchy nor Robert, not particularly tech-savvy, considered it particularly remarkable. They only asked with concern, "Will they be available commercially?" After a moment's thought, Henry said, "Maybe in a few years." Wearing noise-canceling headphones for extended periods isn't good either, because the brain's exposure to fewer sounds over time can affect its ability to filter out sounds without sufficient external stimulation and training. That can make it difficult to focus on a single person when multiple people are talking, or to distinguish the distance and location of voices, but as long as you don't wear them constantly, you won't have that problem. They're also quite good for listening to music, though still not as good as listening in a concert hall. Are you interested? If so, I'll find time to make one for you. Hearing the shortcomings, Givenchy and Robert lost interest. Actually, the noise on a plane isn't that unbearable. They each found a seat and waited for takeoff. Private jets don't have the same pre-takeoff briefings as regular airliners. Unless the passenger has a special preference, they can provide it. So, quickly, the plane lifted off and headed towards the European continent. The lady dozed off, but the three men on the plane weren't quite so aloof. Instead, they engaged in a casual chat. Henry and Givenchy were playing chess, playing casually, not considering the best moves. Robert, flipping through the newspaper, suddenly asked, "Have you been following that rumor lately?" Another riddle. Henry wanted to hit someone. What should he do? But he still cooperated and asked, "What rumor?" "I heard that the United States, inspired by Audrey's speech at the United Nations, has decided to increase its intervention in Somalia and send troops to resolve the civil unrest there. Otherwise, the famine there would never have been alleviated. It's time to act." "Oh," Givenchy and Henry replied, their responses tinging with warmth and coldness. Robert and Givenchy simultaneously looked at Henry, feeling strange, and asked, "Don't you think this is a good thing?" Henry put down his chess piece and said nonchalantly, "The first Gulf War was won, the Red Empire collapsed, and America's dominance as a world power has returned. Do you think this is a good thing?" Robert, who was more talkative about politics, asked, "Isn't it?" Henry countered, "Since World War II, where has the United States helped, or more bluntly, interfered with, achieved true peace?" Robert thought for a moment, but couldn't find a counterexample. He asked, "Really?" Henry bluntly replied, "Regional conflict, civil unrest, poverty and corruption, one of these factors is involved. And the US military doesn't work for nothing. They always take home some benefits. The only thing that could justify robbery so confidently is the British Empire before the World War. So, these two countries are truly like father and son. If he truly wants world peace, he should just leave the world alone." The two listeners chuckled and laughed endlessly. Who told them that one was French and the other was Dutch? Henry, an American, was completely right on their point with his self-mockery. But they could never imagine that Henry was a fake American, actually an alien and a time traveler. On the other hand, Ms. Audrey Hepburn, who was dozing off, could not hear the conversation of the grown men because she was wearing noise-canceling headphones. She could only look at the men laughing happily with a bewildered look on her face. Chapter 193, Winter of Rest. The small town of Trochines in the canton of Vaud, Switzerland, is located in the French-speaking western region, near Geneva, at an altitude of 418 meters, making it a low-lying area. Winter temperatures in Trochines range from 0 degrees Celsius to 6 degrees Celsius. Around Christmas time, blankets of snow are a common sight. However, the latitude here is no higher than that of Alaska, so the climate isn't as harsh as that of regions near the Arctic Circle. Gardens don't require much care during this time of year. As long as the flowers and plants are alive, they're considered fine. No one deliberately prunes them during the winter. But that doesn't mean you can just sit by the fireplace and do nothing. The most important thing is clearing snow from roofs and garden paths. The snow in Trochines doesn't accumulate as heavily as in Alaska, so roofs collapsing under the weight of snow is rare. The snow on the roads is more troublesome. Don't underestimate the thin layer. It just sinks to the ground with a single step, seemingly unnecessary. However, such an action usually only reduces the snow to a thin layer of ice, not completely eliminating it. Thin ice is very slippery, meaning if you don't clean it carefully, your yard will become like an ice rink. It's no surprise that someone could fall and die at any moment. So Henry's first priority upon waking up in the morning was to clear the snow. The roof didn't need to be cleared daily, but the paths in the yard required careful attention, as strolling in the garden was the only exercise Ms. Hepburn could get now. The snow wouldn't disappear unless Henry used his heat ray to melt it. But he didn't want to do that. He simply piled the snow aside. Simply pushing the snow away was too boring. So Henry did something he'd wanted to do for 2 lifetimes but hadn't, build a snowman. So, early this winter in the small town of Trochna, at Ms. Hepburn's home, you could see a young man shoveling snow and then building a snowman. 5 Jack Russell Terriers were frolicking nearby. Because the roads were slippery in winter, Robert didn't go out for a run or walk the dogs, instead staying inside. The 5 dogs took advantage of Henry's time outside to let off some steam, rather than being cooped up inside. But the fun of building snowmen only lasted 2 or 3 days. Henry started sculpting snow. At first, his creations were Cthulhu-like, mind-boggling creatures. Later, he'd create Rodin's The Thinker, Michelangelo's David, the Greek goddess Athena, and New York's Statue of Liberty. He'd essentially shovel snow every day, changing his shape. Henry's large shovel would sweep here, then there. If he went too far, he'd just pat the snow off the ground. It was much easier than a real sculpture, at least he had the chance to start over. Henry didn't expect to be meticulous. After all, if it was left outside, the snow would distort any shape. He basically just used it to pass the morning. The rest of the time was spent practicing his piano. Ms. Hepburn had a meticulously cared for vintage piano at home, not a luxury brand or antique. Occasionally, a skilled pianist would come in to play a tune, or sometimes, on a whim, Ms. Hepburn would tap the keys to soothe herself. But most of the time, it just gathered dust. Henry took advantage of this opportunity to practice on the piano. Although neither Audrey Hepburn nor Robert Wolds were renowned pianists, their acting backgrounds allowed them to appreciate the piano and offer some advice on Henry's playing. Robert described Henry's playing as conventional, following the music sheet without any distinct personality. But at least it wasn't unpleasant to listen to. Practice sessions were brief, lasting only an hour at most. The rest of the time, following Hepburn's lead, was spent immersed in reading. Robert occasionally went about his own business. He wasn't particularly fond of reading. They would sometimes exchange their thoughts on books from their home collection and those borrowed from the local library. Henry, of course, read the most diverse books. He could understand foreign books that neither Hepburn nor Robert could grasp, so they both frequently pestered him to share their reading experiences, sometimes with Hepburn alone. Reading time usually took place in the afternoon. Everyone would sit by the large windows that let in the sun, enjoying the warmth of the winter sun while contemplating the text and pondering the author's thoughts. "Henry, what's your book today?" Ms. Hepburn asked, resting her eyes after a while. Henry held up the book, showing the cover, and said, "Natsume Saseki's Poppy. This is a modern Japanese writer from the late 19th century, It wasn't that he didn't want to read Chinese books, but the small-town library's Chinese collection had already been consumed by morning. "What's it about?" Henry said. "The poppy in the title refers to a red poppy flower. This flower is so enchanting that it's often used as a metaphor for beauty in classical Eastern texts. And because this flower is the raw material for opium, it also implies the dangers of beauty." The story in the book is similar. The heroine's seduction of men is a metaphor for the prosperity brought by Western civilization to Japan at the time, which was just a bubble, a false illusion. "It sounds like a sad story," Ms. Hepburn said intuitively. "Rather than writing a sad story, it's more like a vehicle for showing off literary skills, and then chattering on and on about a bunch of useless truths." Ms. Hepburn chuckled and said, "How come your evaluation has changed the whole feeling?" Henry spread his hands and said, "A writer uses the most gorgeous words to tell the most ordinary stories, and then hides some profound truths just to preach to others." "You are right," Audrey Hepburn agreed. "In fact, there's a very interesting anecdote about this author." "What is it?" Henry said. Because the author was exposed to Western culture quite early, he worked as an English teacher for a while, teaching students English. At that time, a student directly translated the English "I love you" into the Japanese. He said the Japanese wouldn't use such direct expressions, and that would be more appropriate. "This sentence means the moon is beautiful tonight, and implicitly expresses the wish to share a beautiful night with you." "Wow, that sounds beautiful." "Is this true?" Henry said calmly. "No. According to later research, the earliest source of such a statement was more than 10 years after Natsume Saseki's death. It was probably made up by later generations." "Ah, you annoying child, can't you let others have beautiful thoughts?" Audrey Hepburn said dissatisfiedly. "Haha," Henry smiled again and said, "but if a story gets out and people think, that's exactly what this person would do, wouldn't that be amazing too?" "Indeed." Chapter 194 Levels of Love. "Is Japanese culture so reserved?" Ms. Hepburn asked. "It's probably true of all Asian cultures influenced by Eastern culture. While the word love exists in their culture, it's not used easily in relationships between men and women. Why? Are they embarrassed to say it?" Henry thought for a moment and said, "It's probably because in Eastern culture, the word represents a very strong emotion. If two people go from being strangers to losing each other, the feeling they're drawn to is likely to follow them. On a scale of 1 to 10, it's the kind of intense emotion you'd feel if you were to go from being strangers to losing each other. People in Western cultures might use the word love at the 3rd or 4th level. And love for parents, siblings, children, it applies to a wide range of people, so the emotion it represents isn't as strong. In contrast, in Eastern cultures, different words are used to express different emotions for different people. For example, respect, friendship, and caring are used. The single word love is more limited to relationships between men and women. And it might only be used in the bedroom when the feeling reaches a level of 8 or even 9. They wouldn't even use it in public, or with their loved ones. But that was 100 years ago, when the two cultures hadn't yet fully integrated, so such a distinction existed. Now, it's not so clear-cut. Even for a one-night stand, the term has become so cheap that it's easily thrown around. Audrey Hepburn asked curiously, "So how do they express their feelings? Could it be that Orientals have superpowers, that when a boy or girl falls in love, it's like a bridge of the heart, understanding each other's feelings without words?" Henry smiled and said, "How could that be possible? They simply prefer metaphors, more artistic or abstract ways to describe their feelings. For example, as long as I have him, even if I only have a tiny place to stand in this world, I'll be content. My eyes rain for him, but my heart holds an umbrella for him. You reside quietly in my heart, like the full moon in the night sky." Audrey Hepburn knew the source of these lines and said with a sweet smile, Rabindranath Tagore's poems. Yes, this poet, influenced by traditional Indian culture and harmoniously embracing Western culture, has indeed left behind many worthy literary works. Hey, he's recognized as one of the world's 10 greatest writers. How come you describe him as merely very good?" Audrey Hepburn laughed. Henry could only say that this world was the world headed by the British Empire. Islamic and Eastern cultures were never categorized as part of this world, unless those from other cultures actively entered Western cultural circles and adhered to Western norms. To paraphrase a line from a Stephen Chow movie, the referees are all their people, and wanting to win is a waste of time. Ms. Hepburn, seemingly unconvinced, asked, "So, Henry, what's your favorite metaphor for expressing emotion?" One that allows even those who haven't heard the word love to feel the intensity of that emotion, and more. The woman held up both hands, using all her fingers. Pouting, she said, the intensity of the emotion should be closer to the 10 you mentioned. Henry smiled and said, wait a minute, I'll get a pen and paper. After returning, he used a fountain pen to write 2 lines of neat square characters on a large blank notebook. The end of the world may come, but this hatred will last forever. Is this Chinese? Yes. What does it mean? Audrey Hepburn was full of curiosity. No matter how high or long the sky is, no matter how wide or long the earth is, they are tangible things with boundaries. But my hatred is endless and will never end. Are you talking about hatred? Audrey Hepburn asked with wide eyes. How deep the love is, when this emotion is turned over, how deep the hatred will be. By the same token, how deep the hatred is, doesn't it also mean how deep the love is? Hey, you can actually say that. Audrey Hepburn looked at the words written on the paper, savored them carefully, and sighed sincerely. Hepburn asked again, what kind of work does such a sentence come from? Is it a love story? It can be said to be a love story, but it is the kind that ends in tragedy. Can you tell me about it? The lady opened her big watery eyes. Those big eyes that are extremely attractive in the movie. Few people would not surrender when being looked at like this. At least Henry could not resist. Henry could only pick up the pen and write a few big Chinese characters. Song of Everlasting Sorrow, by Zhu Ai. As he said, the author is a figure about 1,200 years ago, and he is a famous contemporary poet. This work of his describes, a hallmark of traditional literature is the use of allusions. An allusion can be cited in a few words, and the story behind it is assumed to be known, or the reader must discover it on their own. Therefore, when explaining Song of Everlasting Regret to Ms. Hepburn, he also had to explain the stories behind these allusions and their purpose in the context. These might be metaphors, or they might capture a certain spirit within the allusion. Sometimes, instead of using allusions, they employ imagery as a metaphor. For example, the phrase "a branch of pear blossoms wet with spring rain" describes the delicate and pitiful appearance of the imperial concubine, moved to tears. Henry then used pencil sketches to vividly depict the pear blossoms, and the atmosphere the wetness added to them. Furthermore, Song of Everlasting Regret itself contains 2 storylines, one about Emperor Minghuang of Tang and his concubine Yang Yifei, and the other about Emperor Wu of Han and Lady Li. Translating this 840-word song-style narrative poem into English would nearly consume every cell in Henry's superhuman brain. The main reason was that Audrey Hepburn wasn't satisfied with a translation that was too literal and lost the beauty of the original work. Henry supplemented the text with sketches and extended narratives to make it comprehensible. Sometimes, a single sentence would require repeated revisions, even including quotations from European and American poetry, before she was satisfied. At this point, Henry had to admire the American-born writer, Lin Yudang. He had the talent to write a biography of Su Dongpo in English and translate those famous poems into English using a European and American style. In total, the translation of Song of Everlasting Sorrow took several days, intermittently. Without the support of a super-intelligible brain, the task wouldn't have been completed so quickly. Robert occasionally offered his thoughts and word suggestions throughout the translation. 3 large notebooks filled with the constantly revised poems, simple sketches, and the stories behind the allusions. All written down word for word at Audrey Hepburn's request. Chapter 195 Christmas Eve. Can I have these 3 notebooks? Audrey Hepburn asked. Henry nodded in agreement without hesitation, saying only one word, okay. If it weren't for the lady's request, Henry wouldn't have bothered to write everything down. Could it be that this Kryptonian superbrain was running out of storage space? So, he gave it to her. He had no regrets about parting with it. On the contrary, these past few days of training had been a very interesting new experience. He was now using a superbrain to solve math or physics problems. As long as the problems weren't too far-fetched, like conjectures, Henry could almost intuitively come up with the answers. However, when it came to literature and philosophy, there was no single solution. Making one's answers convincing, establishing one's own unique aesthetic, and then influencing others, this task was no easier than that of a mathematician or physicist. When it was finally over, Henry breathed a sigh of relief, and was about to swear he would never do such a thing again when Audrey Hepburn asked, "So, son, are there any other love stories like this one that span different cultural backgrounds?" "More?" Henry asked, his eyes wide with horror. "Of course. Women of all ages always love to hear love stories, Audrey Hepburn declared triumphantly. She continued, I agree with you. Different cultures have different perspectives on love. If you want to convince me that love isn't just about Romeo and Juliet or War and Peace, you'll need more evidence to convince me. And then there were those same large eyes again. Watery and glittering, their attack power exceeding 10,000, their damage striking directly at the heart, a single blow decimating the Kryptonian. Okay. But we can only talk about it tomorrow, eh? Why? The old lady, the actress's coquettishness, was subtly destructive. The Kryptonian relied on her thick skin to hold on. Henry said firmly, one story a day is the limit. And tonight is Christmas Eve, and I have to help prepare dinner. The woman's health was not good, so dinner was prepared by Henry or the maid. Okay, then, one a day. But there should be one every day from now on. Wow, boss, you're treating this like the 1001 Nights. I hope you won't have my head chopped off by the time I finish telling you 1,000 stories. I'll pardon you in advance, Ms. Hepburn said with a cheerful smile. She suddenly asked, by the way, since it's Christmas Eve today, where's my Christmas present? You're not going to want me to open it myself under the tree tomorrow, are you? Give it to me in advance, out of consideration for an old person. You already have your Christmas present, Henry said, pointing to the 3 notebooks. I asked for it myself, so it can't really be considered a gift, Audrey Hepburn complained. Henry said ruthlessly, stories from any cultural circle always emphasize one point, greed doesn't lead to good results. So it's good to have a present. I have to go get dinner, boss. Besides Robert, Ms. Hepburn, and Henry, the woman's 2 children will be there for dinner tonight. And Sean Ferrier will be bringing his girlfriend, Lila Franrigan. So there's a lot to prepare. This year, Audrey Hepburn specifically requested a ton of dishes. There were Portuguese king cake, Belgian cookies, Prague carp dishes, German Berliner donuts, Moscow mayonnaise salad, Danish rice pudding, Romanian pork, Swedish pickled herring fillets, smoked salmon and meatballs, French foie gras, oysters, and Baumkuchen, and finally, Spanish sweetbread. There were main courses, desserts, and starchy staples. You didn't have to finish them all, just one bite of each would blow your daily calorie intake. It was a menu that would make even a nutritionist faint. Although Henry hadn't made many of the dishes before, having only the recipes, he was confident in his cooking. It was just a matter of managing the cooking time. Many steps required more than super speed. As usual, he kicked out the 5 Jack Russell Terriers that had wandered into the kitchen. I've never heard of fattening dogs. These dogs are practically balls of fat, and sooner or later, they'll be served. Sean, who had more flexible work schedules, and his girlfriend, Lila, arrived home first. Sean, in his early 30s, was in the prime of his life. He inherited his parents' stunning good looks, giving off a sunny, cheerful vibe. This was precisely why he was so captivated by a sweet, brown-haired girl like Lila. Upon entering, the son gave his mother a big hug. Mom, this is Lila. My girlfriend. Hello, Lila, it's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Hepburn. The two exchanged a heartfelt kiss on the cheek. Lila handed over a paper bag and said, this is a Christmas gift I prepared especially for Ms. Hepburn. A hand-knitted scarf. Audrey Hepburn pulled out a scarf with a simple, elegant pattern and meticulously crafted stitches. She exclaimed, wow, this scarf is so beautiful. Sean, look, the girl you picked has such a deft hand. Then she wrapped it around her neck. At the same time, Audrey Hepburn grasped Lila's hand tightly and said, Lila, just call me Audrey. Come in and sit with me. This delighted the young couple. At least the first meeting between the future mother-in-law and daughter-in-law seemed quite harmonious. A little later, Luca Dotti also returned. With a psychiatrist as his father, Luca, while not as handsome as his older brother, was certainly more intelligent and had better academic performance. The 2 half-brothers, born under the same mother, were personally cared for by Audrey Hepburn from childhood. However, in pursuit of better educational resources, they moved between prestigious universities across Europe, either boarding or with a dedicated nanny. As a result, the brothers' relationship was neither close nor unfamiliar. After all, they were 10 years apart in age. By the time Luca could remember, Sean was already attending boarding school. Furthermore, both of them had complicated feelings about Robert. However, they knew their mother better, a woman who desperately needed family support and a man to lean on. As children, they had their own lives and careers to build. So, it seemed understandable that their father, unable to remain kind and loyal to their mother, was replaced. At least Robert took good care of his mother. In Henry's eyes, this picture of a family reunion concealed an undisguised estrangement. They all loved the same woman in different roles, but they did not love each other equally. The only thing to be thankful for was that they did not hate each other. This was not a relationship between a husband and wife and a third or fourth person. And Henry was just a cook and a freeloader. Chapter 196 The Comatose Critically Ill Patient. The Christmas gathering seemed to fulfill Audrey Hepburn's final wish. As soon as New Year's Day in 1993 ended, Hepburn's health took a sharp turn for the worse. While undergoing chemotherapy at a Swiss hospital, she collapsed from the severe side effects and was rushed to a hospital ward. Watching her unconscious bedside, all her vital signs were languishing at a low point. While not worsening, her condition was visibly deteriorating. The doctor had just outlined the available emergency measures, all of which were somewhat invasive. Robert asked worriedly, "Doctor, is this treatment really necessary?" The doctor replied, "It's essentially a gamble on whether Ms. Hepburn will survive and recover naturally. But honestly, given her age and pre-existing condition, her chances of recovery are slim, so, using medical equipment to maintain her life is the most appropriate approach. But in my experience, once these devices are installed, there's a high probability she'll never recover." A doctor who has seen enough patients can certainly judge whether a patient still has hope of recovery. But sometimes there are disagreements about whether professional considerations for rescue are necessary and the wishes of the family members. Of course, it is impossible for a doctor to make arbitrary decisions on his own about a patient's life or death. Maybe there will be a miracle that everyone is looking forward to. Henry, Robert looked helplessly at his comrades who had been accompanying him and taking care of Ms. Hepburn during this period. Henry shook his head and said, "I have notified the boss's 2 children, and they are on their way here. From the legal point of view, neither of us is qualified to decide anything." Turning to look at the doctor, Henry continued, "So please, doctor, please do your best to maintain Ms. Hepburn's life. The question of whether to use machines to maintain life can only be decided by the lady's 2 children, I understand." Then the doctor issued a series of instructions, and the nurses quickly took action. At this time, is it still useful to send her to the United States? Henry thought doubtfully in his heart. Although Sean and Luca lived in different places, they arrived at the hospital at about the same time. When they arrived at the hospital, Henry told them first-hand information. This was the way everyone had been accustomed to since Henry became an assistant. Anyway, Henry would first give a general idea of the situation, and if there were still some parts that they didn't understand, they would ask the person in question. Anyway, no matter what method we use, we should try our best to save our mother's life. I think we should give our mother a decent departure, instead of letting her be plugged into tubes and maintaining her heartbeat while unconscious. The 2 young men, Sean and Luca, expressed different opinions. Unfortunately, no one could convince the other. Robert and Henry could only watch to prevent the 2 brothers from fighting. "Robert, what do you think?" Luke asked. Robert's expression froze at being suddenly called out. He hadn't meant to get involved in the sibling dispute, but being called out suddenly, with both brothers staring at him, he felt compelled to speak up. Luca pressed on, "You've spent more time with Mother over these past decade than any of us have. What do you think she would do if she were conscious?" Robert, helpless, replied, "Luca, I think your mother would agree with you, a dignified death, not a life-threatening one, like a medical cyborg." Sean immediately scolded him, "What a bullshit opinion. As long as you're alive, you have a chance. If you give up now, even if there's a chance of recovery in the future, without life, all chances are gone. And who are you, Robert? I don't agree with that." "Henry, what are you saying? Damn it. Brother, you're clearly asking me to express my support for your position." Robert was already saying things like he was being indifferent to the other person's words. How could my words count? Not wanting to follow the insane young man's lead, Henry said, "Actually, why don't we just ask Ms. Hepburn herself?" The moment he said that, Henry received scornful glances from everyone present. Sean, even more discontented, said, "Audrey's in a coma, and no one knows what she's thinking. Otherwise, why would we even ask you?" Henry said quietly, "There are mutants in this world, and some of them have telepathic abilities. While the lady may be unable to speak, her consciousness isn't dead either." Sean frowned and asked, "You have this method, why didn't you use it earlier?" The results of mutant abilities don't have legal force, meaning they can't form the basis for a doctor's judgment. Only you two have the authority to make decisions on her behalf. And whether you're willing to trust mutant abilities is also a question. Luca frowned and asked, "So you're a mutant? Do you have such abilities?" Henry shook his head in denial. "No, I'm not. Of course, I don't have telepathy, but I can find people to help. It all depends on whether you need it. Honestly, I'm an alien, and I don't have telepathy." The two brothers exchanged a glance, and Sean nodded. "Henry, I'll leave it to you. How long will it take for your friend to arrive? I'll contact them first. I don't know how long it will take them to get here, but I'll do my best to ask them." "Thank you." Henry left the ward and found a public phone that could make international calls. Who else could he turn to in this situation? Of course, the X-Men, the ones who had been fooled. He didn't necessarily need Professor X to come personally, and it would be best if it wasn't this bald guy. There were so many mutants who could read minds anyway, any one of them could solve the problem. He hadn't been in touch with the X-Men since the Dark Phoenix incident 6 months ago. The previous contact was initiated by them, not Henry's initiative. Would the X-Men be willing to help him now? Henry wasn't sure, but he called anyway. Amidst his trepidation, the call was answered. A sweet female voice spoke on the other end of the line, saying, "This is the Jean Grey School for Gifted Youngsters. Where can I find it, huh? Did the school change its name? Did something happen to the X-Men?" He had some questions, but they were of little importance. Henry said, "This is Henry Brown. Please speak to any X-Men." "Oh, Hank McCoy, preferably." "Is he there?" He was a rough-looking, honest beast, easy to bully, no, easy to persuade. "I'm a kind-hearted person, how could I bully others?" If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 197, Shaking People. The girl on the line said, "In that case, I'll put you through to the principal." "Please hold." The call was connected. The principal? Professor X? He was still wondering if Professor X's abilities could somehow be channeled through the line when it was picked up again. A fierce female voice rudely asked, "What are you doing? Who are you?" Click, beep, the line was hung up. A familiar feeling instantly struck him. As the saying goes, God has his way, and no one escapes. Another saying goes, it's not that I don't want to pay you back, it's just that the time hasn't come yet. Henry, frustrated, couldn't help but call again. As soon as the line was picked up, Henry said, "This is Henry Brown." Click, beep, a familiar smell. Henry decided to endure it for once. If he was hung up again, he'd go and ask in person. Who knew there wouldn't be a massacre of bodies by then? When the phone was picked up again, Henry said quickly, "Hey, don't hang up again, or I'll get angry." A heavy breath came from the other end of the phone. After a moment, he said, "Why are you calling? I want to ask you for a small favor. I worked so hard for you before. Even if I didn't get any credit, I still worked hard. It's not too much to ask you to help me with a small favor. It doesn't have to involve fighting, and it's not a crime. It just may have to go a little far away." Over here in Switzerland, Mystique, the new principal of the School for Gifted Youngsters, said in a more gentle tone, "What for? A woman is in a coma due to illness, and now her family can't decide whether to save her or what to do. So they need to ask someone with telepathic abilities to come and ask her for her opinion." Mystique cursed. "In Europe, you wouldn't just ask an old gypsy woman with a crystal ball to perform a spell and solve the problem," Henry said in an equally unpleasant tone. "Aside from being used as a basis for criminal judgments, mutants' abilities have no legal effect in civil matters. It's already unreliable for me to come to you, and you can give me an even more unreliable opinion. Just say whether you will help or not. If you don't help me, just refuse them and say there's nothing I can do," Mystique said viciously. "Help? Why not? Remember this, you owe me another," Henry protested. "I helped you fight the aliens last time, wasn't that enough? I just want a favor, why should I owe you another? Last favor was only enough for me to answer your call calmly. If you want me to do something, you have to owe another favor, damn it. What kind of bandit logic is this? Don't think that just because you're a woman and grew up under the stars and stripes, this kind of thing can be justified. The worst that can happen is that I can just deny it later. Henry made up his mind and said, all right. I owe you one. How quickly can you get here? It'd be better if it's not Professor X. That person in the wheelchair needs help again. What a bother. I remember quite a few of you mutants have telepathic abilities, so just any ordinary one will do. Mystique could clearly hear her gasp on the line. Think of it like buying apples at the market, you can pick and choose. Besides, that idiot has retired. I don't know where he is, and I don't want to find him. I'll contact someone else to see if she's willing to come over. If she's willing, she should be quick, but I'm not sure. We'll see whether it works or not. Where is your place? Her words were incoherent, with no clear logic. Henry noticed, however, that Mystique used the female form she instead of the male form he. Does this mean that telepathy is more common among female mutants? Henry remained silent with his inward complaint, replying, I'm currently at the Geneva University Hospital in Geneva, Switzerland. Go to the main entrance and wait for someone. If you don't see them within half an hour, they're gone. Click, beep, beep, beep. Looking at the microphone, Henry had the urge to fly to New York to talk to someone. In the end, he hung up the microphone gently and took a deep breath. Go back to the ward to explain the situation? After thinking about it, Henry walked directly to the main entrance of the hospital. He didn't want to go back to that place with low pressure. It is said that it is difficult for a judge to judge family affairs. The situation of the two half-brothers will only be more complicated. It is true that Henry likes to eat melons and watch the show, but at least he must ensure that he is in a safe place. If he is involved, it will be funny if the father-in-law becomes the victim. Came to the main entrance of the university hospital. In Geneva in winter, the temperature at night is not below 0 degrees Celsius, but it is also very low. Although this low temperature is not noticed by the Kryptonian physique, it is boring to stand there and wait for people. Henry can only look up while breathing out white air. Although the night sky becomes very dim in the urban area with serious light pollution. But for the eyesight of Kryptonians, it is not a big problem to see some low-magnitude stars clearly. To his eyes, the sky was still the Milky Way. Then, Henry saw something he didn't want to see. Is it too late to run now? The question had barely crossed his mind when a figure descended from the sky. It was already dark, otherwise there would have been a scene. It was none other than Jean Grey, the Phoenix. She was dressed casually in jeans and a bomber jacket, but her long, flowing red hair was striking. Still can't control your powers? Henry asked calmly, trying to appear calm and composed. No, it's just that seeing you made me so excited that I wanted to hit you, Jean Grey said bitterly, clenching her fists. If you want to fight, let's do it some other time, somewhere else. We can't do it here. Having already decided to renege on his promise to the X-Men, Henry wasn't afraid to run away then. Jean Grey said with restraint, I don't want to fight you in a place like this. Where are you? Come with me. Having turned and led the way, Henry stopped after only a few steps. Looking back, he asked, can you change your appearance? Why? Do I look so scary? Jean Grey's eyes held a cold, deathly gaze, as if she would wipe the person from reality if they disagreed. Henry could only explain, it's not a question of whether you're scary or not. I just guess you're probably still on the wanted list back in the States. The hospital has surveillance footage, so to avoid trouble, a slight makeover wouldn't hurt. There are many ways to do it. The simplest is direct plastic surgery, adjusting your own features. Another way is to use mental power to make others see you in a different light, or distort the water vapor or light around you to create a kind of invisibility effect. With your current strength, these things shouldn't be difficult. It depends on which method you find suitable or whichever is easiest to use. Chapter 198, Mind Connection. Superman could even use his acting skills to pass for Clark Kent's reporter identity without being noticed by most people. For the Phoenix Force, which can influence reality, keeping a low profile is easier, not harder. But just as Henry couldn't control Tony Stark's actions, Jean Grey couldn't just do whatever Henry said. She said coldly, none of your business. I can handle it myself. Just lead the way, Henry muttered, dissatisfied. I'm not worried about you. I'm worried about you causing trouble for others. Are all superheroes like this? They only care about satisfying their own vanity and don't care about the lives of others. You? Jean Grey glared at him fiercely, her eyes flashing. Henry, unfazed by the threatening gaze, feigned ignorance and didn't even look at him, muttering, if you want to do whatever you want, go back to heaven. If you want to live like a human being on Earth, live like a human being, Ah! A gasp. Jean Grey clenched her teeth, as if she wanted to crush the man's bones. Finally, she patted her cheeks to calm herself. Jean Grey said, "I'm fine. Let's go. What's changed about you?" "I can't tell," Henry asked, looking at her in surprise. "It affects your cognition. Even the surveillance footage shows you as a different person. Your brain is abnormal. I don't want to interfere too much and follow in Professor X's footsteps. Such widespread mind control would be a heavy burden for ordinary telepaths. But for Jean Grey, the Phoenix host, it was easier than suppressing all the energy within her body." Although Jean Grey didn't have a deep understanding of the energy within her, it seemed as if it had its own consciousness and didn't want to approach Henry, which was why it was acting ineffectively. Then, with a sly look on his face, Henry approached and asked, "So, are you considered a man or a woman by others now?" Receiving another death stare, Henry spread his hands and said, "I have to know. What if I introduce you to someone incorrectly when we go in? Are you going to cooperate with this exchange? Why can't you just admit your mistake?" "Oh, that's fine too. Anyway, we'll take things as they come. First to speak wins," Henry said playfully. "My gender hasn't changed." Jean Grey gritted her teeth, regretting her trip. "Got it, let's go." Henry then led the group into the hospital. The VIP ward was on a higher floor, but there was no access control, so they just asked the nurses at the nurses' station. The two of them returned to the ward smoothly. The atmosphere in the ward was better than the tit-for-tat before Henry left. Now it was like a morning. "Is this better?" A certain Kryptonian was skeptical. Jean Grey, who also entered the room, saw the person on the bed. As Raven had guessed, it was Ms. Audrey Hepburn. If it weren't for the big star, Jean wouldn't have wanted to come. But as soon as she entered the room, she became the focus of everyone. Her eyes were not very friendly, which made Jean a little uncomfortable. Henry introduced, "This is Phoenix, a candidate member of the American X-Men. She possesses telepathic abilities. My suggestion is that she communicate with the unconscious Ms. Hepburn." Jean Grey, unlike other mutants in this world, didn't possess distinctive features, nor was she often on the front lines of the X-Men's battles. Therefore, unlike Raven, Aurora, Scott, and the others, she didn't have a special name for herself, like Mystique, Storm, and Cyclops. The name Phoenix was a new one. To Jean, it sounded like Henry's random fabrication, as she didn't yet know the power she possessed was called the Phoenix Force. While no one had heard of Phoenix, the X-Men had. The American superhero team enjoyed a good working relationship with the government. This eased everyone's expressions slightly. But Sean still questioned, "How can we trust your words?" "They're my mother's wool," Henry introduced them. "This is Sean Ferrier, Ms. Hepburn's eldest son. The man next to him is Luca Dotti, her second son." They were introduced together. Knowing who was questioning her, Jean no longer felt offended. After all, they were family, so she had the right to question them. Jean Grey then said, "Then I can use another method to connect your consciousness with Ms. Hepburn, allowing you to communicate with her yourselves. But whether you believe the conclusions drawn from this method is not my problem." The two brothers exchanged glances and nodded in agreement. But Jean added, "I've never entered a patient's consciousness, let alone connected with a healthy person's. So I'm not entirely sure what will happen. But there won't be any danger, that's for sure." Seeing that everyone agreed, Jean added, "Then if you're ready, let's begin. May I reach out and shake Ms. Hepburn's hand?" Robert offered a side of the bed and helped lift Audrey Hepburn's hand from under the covers so she could shake it with the Phoenix woman. Holding that bony hand, even Jean felt momentarily lost in thought. Unlike a child's hand, this one was the size of an adult's. When grasped, it felt all bony and dry, as if foreshadowing the final moments of life. Jean Grey only dared to squeeze it gently, not firmly, fearing she'd crush it too hard and break it. She extended her other hand to the woman's two children, saying, "You two brothers, place your hands here." Sean and Luca, without a second thought, placed theirs on Phoenix's. The moment their hands met, their consciousnesses were pulled into a unique space. There was no up or down, no left or right, no ground to stand on, and even their own image was hazy. Jean didn't intentionally guide the two ordinary people, who had never experienced such a thing. Their consciousness simply drew them to the other person. It was a girl of 6 or 7, curled up, hugging her legs like a baby in the womb. Perhaps she had always been the girl who needed family, her parents, the most. "Mother," the voice of one of the brothers awoke the sleeping girl. As she slowly opened her eyes, time passed by her. She grew from a girl to a young woman, then to a young woman, then to maturity and old age. Like an epiphyllum, from the moment its bud first blooms to its withering, all in a single instant. When she fully opened her eyes, she was Audrey Hepburn, lying on a hospital bed. She hugged two sobbing little boys, but looked off into an empty space, a kind smile on her face. There was Jean Grey, and there was Phoenix. Chapter 199 Discharge. "Mom, let's go home," Sean, his eyes closed and tears streaming, said his first words after regaining consciousness. Luca, also weeping, simply nodded. Jean, returning from the conscious world with her, let go of the two older boys' hands. This was the stiffness that comes with being pulled into the conscious world, someone unaccustomed to being pulled into it, unable to fully control their body and comprehend the state of their body and surroundings upon returning. She hadn't noticed she was still holding the hand of a stranger. But just as she was about to let go, she found herself unexpectedly captured. "Child, who are you, Mom? You're awake." Jean stared in surprise at the patient in the bed, holding her hand, her eyes wide open. "You all came in here and made such a noise. How could I not wake up?" Audrey Hepburn said, struggling to sit up. A group of people worked together to raise the front of the bed and place more pillows behind the woman. During this moment, Audrey Hepburn still held on to Jean Grey's hand, asking, "Child, you haven't told me your name yet," Henry interrupted. "Boss, this is the X-Men's backup, Phoenix." "Phoenix, what a great name." "Henry, it's yours." Her eyes flickered, and even before he spoke, Henry knew what embarrassing question the actress was about to ask. He immediately denied it. "No, she's just someone I've asked for help. She has a boyfriend in the X-Men. I don't touch women who are already taken. That's a fundamental principle in life," a certain Kryptonian spoke righteously. "I'm not a thief, unless I'm being warmed by the Jiangdong or Kyo." Phoenix's looks and figure were impressive, but who has such a good mouth? Only Cyclops and Wolverine, two brave men, weren't afraid of being bullied. But reality is, bullying is the norm. Audrey Hepburn, realizing her misunderstanding, apologized readily, saying, "I'm sorry, Phoenix, I misunderstood. But thank you so much for coming to help me." "No, I'm glad I could help," Jean replied, slightly tightening her handshake with Audrey. Then they both let go. Perhaps it was because the protagonist had woken up, and it seemed strange for the two children to continue crying, so they both fell silent. Luca, the youngest son, choked up and said, "Audrey, can we go to America to continue treatment?" Reluctantly reaching out to comfort her child, Audrey Hepburn said, "I've seen the world at its most fantastical, and I've also seen it at its worst. I believe I'm always trying to live my life to the best of my ability. I have children with the men I've loved, and both of them have grown up to be quite remarkable men. In the final stages of my life, I hope to spread this love, and I have tried hard to do so. However, this is a road with no end, and at this moment, I can only choose to pass on the baton. Now that it's time to say goodbye, it's time to thank the cast and crew with a credited song that fits the film. I haven't acted in a sequel yet, so please don't make an exception for me." Audrey extended a frail hand to Robert, his life partner who was more than a friend, and tearfully grasped it. "I've tried so hard, and this is enough," Robert sobbed. "Audrey, you've done well. Not many could do better." "Then let's go home." To Troshna, though her words were weak, Audrey Hepburn, fully aware, decided her own fate. She turned to her assistant behind the crowd and said, "Henry, I'm sorry to trouble you again, boss, if that's what you wish." The Kryptonian, who was so calm that he was almost indifferent, actually didn't know what kind of mood he should show in such an occasion. However, after learning the wishes expressed by the person after he woke up, even the doctors in the hospital did not express anything else. They just asked Henry to go through the discharge procedures and explain the content of palliative care. Patients who are discharged from the hospital are not really completely free from medical means. It's just that the medical treatment at this stage is not aimed at curing the disease, but at reducing the patient's pain. Although after returning home, the patient is not like staying in a palliative care ward with a prescription written by a doctor and professional care provided by a nurse. But there are still many things to do in their own home. Henry will be responsible for conveying these to others and taking on the main part of home medical care. By the time the group sent Audrey Hepburn home and settled her down, it was already quite late. Henry then discovered that an uninvited guest had followed him. He looked at the Phoenix girl who had been busy with everyone and had just finished with a speechless expression, and said, "You haven't left yet." Jean Grey looked embarrassed, scratched her head and said, "I didn't find a good time to say goodbye, and since everyone needs help, I'll..." Just as she was about to say something about sending people away, Audrey Hepburn, who had just lay down on the bed, said, "Henry, it's so late, and it's not easy to find a hotel outside. Help the girl prepare a room for her to stay." "No, boss, as long as this little girl wants, she can appear anywhere on the earth at any time." "This is completely meaningless, okay?" But Henry didn't say the complaints in his heart after all, but said, "Okay, boss. Ms. Phoenix, please follow me." At the sudden change of the man's face, Jean Grey said a little uncomfortably, "Are you crazy? You smile so strangely. Since you are the boss's guest, politeness is the quality I must show." Henry's smile was textbook, without a trace of misalignment. But that was the strangest part. Resisting the urge to punch, Jean Grey followed Henry to the guest room. She'd compromised so easily because she'd been wandering since the last Alien War. She hadn't returned to the X-Men school, nor to the Brotherhood of Mutants shelter. Due to pressure from the US government, the X-Men didn't dare openly take her in, and Jean didn't want to cause trouble for the shelter on Genosha Island. Although she'd contacted both sides and explained their situation, she'd already been homeless for over 6 months. Raven had been asked to help this time, essentially, to demonstrate that she was still needed and could still be of use, not a burden to be shunned. For many, the feeling that she still had value to society, or to someone, was like a rope to anchor them to the harbor, keeping their hearts from drifting on the sea. The warmth of Ms. Hepburn's handshake temporarily dispelled her unease. Everything would be perfect if there weren't some alien. Chapter 200 The End of Life. Ms. Hepburn's 2 children had their own lives and responsibilities, so they left again. However, they still told Henry to contact them if anything happened. At times like these, it's better to worry about missing something than to complain about a wasted trip. From this explanation, it seems everyone knows what's about to happen, they just don't say it. However, one unexpected person stayed. It was Jean Grey, known as Phoenix. Henry was shoveling snow early in the morning. Watching Jean Grey playing with her dogs, or rather, being surrounded by 5 dogs, the shoveling assistant was speechless. Those 5 Jack Russell Terriers were truly fearless. Didn't they realize they could be turned into barbecue at any moment? "Are you thinking of something disrespectful?" Jean Grey suddenly asked. "No. I'm not," Henry replied firmly. But then, realizing who he was, he said guiltily, "I just thought it was really nice of you to stay and help." This was the truth. Because the person he was caring for was a woman, there were always things Henry couldn't do. Although he had Robert, his supposed life partner, he was in his 50s, almost 60, and there were things he couldn't do. If they weren't careful, they could both fall and get hurt, which would be even worse. So, Jean Grey's presence was a perfect way to fill the gap in care. Phoenix, aware of her own importance, said proudly, "When I was at the Juvenile Academy, I was also responsible for logistics and medical care. These are no big deal to me." "Yes," Henry said. He simply didn't want to get too involved in that topic. Meanwhile, his snow sculpture needed just one more shovelful of work. With one final stroke, a vivid Snoopy sat in the courtyard. Jean Grey was amazed by the entire sculpture process. Yesterday, it was the genie from Disney's Aladdin, and the day before, it was Garfield. If she knew that before Hepburn's return to the hospital, Henry had been recreating sculptures from famous artists, she wondered what she would think. Each day that followed was a rather ordinary one, with little change. Henry would still choose a time to practice piano, and they would read together in the afternoons. However, this time, Henry mostly read aloud, with Hepburn listening. The content, of course, was the promised 1,000 love stories from different cultures, one a day. He would read in the original language while translating them into English or French, explaining the cultural and story contexts and selecting the best translations. He would then record them. Even Jean Grey enjoyed this time. As Hepburn once said, "No woman, no matter her age, can ever get enough love stories." The final countdown ticked by minute, in this ordinary life. Until January 19th, Hepburn lapsed into another abnormal coma. Henry called her 2 children, saying, "Perhaps the time is almost up. Please come back as soon as possible." The next day, Sean Ferrier and Luca Dotti rushed back to their home in Ticino, Switzerland. Meanwhile, a family physician and nurse set up simple monitoring equipment, including a heart rate monitor. Perhaps everyone had been mentally prepared for this day, so the atmosphere didn't seem as tense as expected. Even non-smokers started smoking, and those who already smoked did so excessively, nearly lighting up a pack in one breath. Everyone was very restrained in their drinking, avoiding excessive intoxication. While they occasionally ventured into the courtyard for some fresh air, they mostly gathered around Hepburn's bedside. The sound of the television was the only sound in the room, aside from the beeping of the equipment. The news happened to be reporting on events related to Audrey Hepburn. For example, last December, President George H.W. Bush awarded Hepburn the Presidential Medal of Freedom. At the time, Hepburn was too ill to fly across the ocean, so someone from the White House received it on her behalf and was later transferred to Switzerland. Another news item was about Nobel Peace Prize winner Mother Teresa. Upon learning of Hepburn's critical illness, she called on all nuns to pray for her through the night, praying for her miraculous recovery. The prayers echoed around the world. From the news footage streaming in from around the world, it's clear this was a massive publicity spree, but who benefited from it all is unclear. It's not like anyone in this room cared. On the evening of the 20th, Hepburn's family physician pronounced her dead and shut down all medical procedures. A wave of grief spread among those at her bedside, including her life partner, Robert, and her two children, Sean and Luca. Henry, Jean Grey, and the other maid stood at the outer edge of the room. Most sobbed quietly. Such a considerate employer is rare. Everyone was heartbroken by Audrey Hepburn's passing. Even Jean Grey, who had only known her for a few days, felt the same grief. Henry, however, was almost uncharacteristically calm. But at a time like this, having someone so calmly handle matters, allowing others to fully immerse themselves in their grief, seemed like a good thing. On the 24th, Hepburn's funeral was held at the church in Troshna, presided over by Reverend Maurice Dodger. This same pastor also officiated the wedding of Audrey Hepburn and Mel Ferrier in 1960 and baptized their child, Sean. Many friends and family attended the funeral, including Audrey Hepburn's two sons, Robert Wolds, her half-brother Ian Quarles Van Ufford, and her ex-husbands, Mel Ferrier and Andre Dottie. Of course, Audrey Hepburn's close friend Hubert de Givenchy was also in attendance. Many senior UNICEF executives were also in attendance. Fellow Hollywood figures, most notably legendary French actor Alain Diran and Roger Moore, who played 007 and became the second James Bond. Gregory Parker, the actor who played the lead in Roman Holiday, sent flowers. Also sending flowers were Hollywood Queen Elizabeth Taylor and the Dutch royal family. The funeral was delivered by Reverend August Sadruddin, Consulate of UNICEF. The 6 most important men in Audrey Hepburn's life carried her pallbearers. Givenchy led the way, followed by Mel Ferrier, Andre Dottie, Robert Wolders, Sean Ferrier, and Luca Dottie. The sight of 6 men walking harmoniously together, bidding farewell to a woman they loved, speaks volumes. Isn't this the moment of final judgment? Finally, Audrey Hepburn was buried in the Dolochina Cemetery in Troshna. Her life, at the age of 63, came to an end. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.